we are good to go.
Yeah, good to go. You just need to speak little louder.
Okay. So good evening to one and all. iHera and Zydus welcomes you all to the fifth edition of Simplifying Embryology. Today's topic is IVF, conventional versus unconventional. So welcoming all delegates. So today's coordinators are Dr. Charudar Joshi and Dr. Ved Prakash, the academic partners being Zydus, the makers of Bryogyne, Naturalist and Zayach Energy. So just a brief about Dr. Charudar Joshi. Obviously, he doesn't need introduction. He is practicing currently at Indore. He is postgraduate in life sciences, uh, special training in ICSI, IVF and SPUR from Genk, Belgium, special training for embryo freezing from KK Women's Hospital, Singapore. He has done a special training in laser-assisted hatching from Belgium, done a special training in PGD from Germany, has done his doctorate in life sciences. He is the executive committee member of MP ISA chapter as well as MP IFS chapter. He has been the past vice president of ACE. He has been the past president of ACE between 2014 and 16 as well. He is the media director at Genes India ART Bank. So welcoming Dr. Charudar Joshi.
Hello,
Our,
everyone.
our second coordinator for today is Dr. Ved Prakash. He is practicing currently at Delhi. He is the lab director at Southern Fertility and IVF, Delhi and NCR. He is master in biotechnology. He's trained in IVF and ICSI from Andrology and IVF Lab, KK Women's and Children's Hospital, Singapore. He has done his advanced training in IVF, ICSI, and embryo biopsy at AZVU Brussels. He's the Vice President of Academy of Clinical Embryologists, India. So, welcoming Dr. Charudar Joshi and Dr. Ved Prakash.
Thank you. Thank you.
Over to you. Looking forward to a very informative session.
Thank you. Thank you, Sahana, for nice introduction. So, welcome all of you on behalf of iHera. And as you know that we are continuously organizing the webinars to pass on the very comprehensive ART knowledge to all our participants. And now today we have one very interesting topic, IVF, conventional versus unconventional. So today we have Dr. Jason Swan from US, and our panel will be on that IVF. Dr. Priya Kannan and Dr. Sarpreet is going to moderate that panel discussion. So I request our Dr. Charudar Joshi to please introduce Dr. Jason Swan. Over to Dr. Charudar Joshi.
Hello, good evening, everyone. This is on behalf of iHera, I welcome you all. And it is a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Swan. Basically, if I talk about him, he is the very basic worker on pH, which is very important part of our culture system in embryology lab. And I went through so many papers of him, and it is so nicely explained by him. So it is our privilege to have him on this platform to share the knowledge about the conventional and unconventional IVF, because we all know culture conditions are also one of very important part in our system. So Dr. Ved, can you share the introduction slide, please?
Yes. Sorry.
So I hope today this is going to be a very fantastic session, because we all are now returning back to conventional IVF. Slowly the concept of IVF is picked up again. Welcome Dr. Swan. He little bit introduction about him. He is a corporate lab director at CCRM Fertility with 11 IVF labs in North America. He is adjunct associate professor, Rutgers University of Minnesota. He is a former associate professor and IVF lab director at University of Michigan. Over 60 peer-reviewed publication and invited book chapters, reviewed articles are in his credit. So I would welcome Dr. Swan and to listen the fantastic talk about the conventional IVF and unconventional IVF procedures. Welcome, Dr. Swan.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So today I was asked to talk about the difference between single step and sequential culture media and kind of explain a little bit about the two systems, the benefits and the potential detriments of each approach. And I think, hopefully at the end of the lesson, you'll learn that both approaches to culturing embryos have their strengths and disadvantages. And really it's incumbent upon the laboratory to trial these two media approaches in their laboratories under their conditions to determine which is going to work best, considering the vast number of variables that can impact the efficiency of a culture media. So when we talk about culture media, it's really important to remember that we actually use several media in the laboratory. We use different media for isolating sperm or washing sperm, collecting eggs, maturing eggs. We use specialized media when we remove cumula cells in preparation for ICSI. We may use a specialized holding media to buffer pH during procedures outside of the incubator like ICSI. Same with biopsy, specialized embryo transfer now with hyaluronin, and certainly specialized vitrification media and warming media. And all of these media have been very carefully formulated to consider the specific requirements of the respective cells, and certainly metabolic requirements in terms of glucose and other energy substrates, but also some of the other additives to help stabilize that culture environment, because different cells have different capabilities. Certainly we had heard a little bit about pH earlier, and different cells have different ability to regulate pH, and the culture media is changed to help protect those cells based on their ability to protect themselves. Additionally, there are with multiple media products and other related products that can impact how that media works. Oil, protein, several different types of protein. And when you add these to the media, it absolutely can impact how that media works. And so people sometimes, I think, forget that when they publish or when they read publications, is they may compare two different media, but if they use a different oil or a different protein, that could be the reason why one media performs well in one laboratory and not the other. So I think a really important question for every embryologist to know is, which media do you use in your lab at different steps, and why? Has there been testing? Have there been proper splits or trials done to determine, especially if you want to look at changing media? But for the purpose of this talk and in general, when people talk about culture media in IVF, they're really talking about embryo culture media, or those media where we put the zygotes in and culture out, usually to the blastocyst stage. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So as I mentioned, as suggested by the title slide, there are two main culture media approaches. There's the sequential system, which many used to refer to this as the back to nature approach. And as we'll talk, that name really doesn't hold true anymore. But in terms of sequential media, this is really the purposeful change in the media to adjust the compensation to try to mimic the changing conditions in the female reproductive tract between the fallopian tube and the uterus. And this attempts to meet the changing metabolic needs of the developing embryo, specifically the cleavage stage embryo up until day 3, and then from day 3 to day 5 or 6 to the compacting morula and blastocyst stage. Certainly we know that metabolism changes, and so the media tries to address those changing metabolic needs. The other approach is the single step media, or some people refer this as the monophasic approach. This has been kind of nicknamed the let the embryo choose approach. And really the premise of this is to use a single media to provide all the components that an embryo may need, and the embryo picks and chooses when it needs it, versus us dictating that in the sequential system. Importantly, as we'll discuss, this can be with or without medium change, or interrupted versus uninterrupted, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. So those are the two main approaches, but really, this is a cartoon that I have to give a little bit of the history. So really back in 2003, I think, maybe a little bit earlier for some of the early adopters, is when the field as a whole really went to these embryo-specific sequential culture media. And certainly David Gardner and Bill Schoolcraft here at Colorado Center for Reproductive Medicine in the US were one of the big proponents and pioneers of the G1, G2 culture media. I remember using this back in 1999 and 2000, trying to on a variety of domestic species as I was in graduate school. I think we were the first to try to use a sequential G1 media to grow pig embryos and goat embryos and cow embryos. In 2003 is really when I think a lot of people in clinical IVF really adopted this sequential media approach, and it worked very, very well. It really was critical to allow the increased adoption of culturing in high rates human embryos out to the blastocyst stage. And then, this cartoon attempts to show that was also non-sequential media, a single solution media, and this would really be global. And there are a few people using this, certainly the minority at this point in time, at least from the perspective of Life Global, the company. And this Life Global was a single step media really based on casome amino acids culture media that was developed by John Biggers. And so this cartoon shows John Biggers and Don Rieger, who are the two biggest vocal proponents of using Life Global, really the only single step media developed for commercial sale for human embryos at the time, versus the large members of the IVF field who were using sequential media. And then around 2006, at least again from the perspective of those at Life Global, increased use of single step media as people started kind of seeing some of the advantage and certainly the benefit of Life Global, this single step solution. And then by 2013, much more wide adoption of a single step approach. And I like to show this cartoon because I was fortunate enough to meet John Biggers a few times and was able to get his autograph. And I've known Don Rieger for a few years now, and he's always been extremely nice and responsive to me whenever I've had questions. I was able to get his autograph as well. So I like to keep this poster in my office just as a bit of a historical keepsake from these two pioneers in the field of use of single step media. But the take home point there is that both media are used clinically and can be used well clinically. Certainly, we've seen a shift to adoption over the last few years to single step media, and we'll talk about that. I think most people understand that. But for the audience, really the main differences can be seen here in terms of sequential media. As we mentioned, there's two steps to meet the changing metabolic needs and other homeostatic needs of the developing embryo. Step one tends to have non-essential amino acids, reduced or no glucose. Often it has EDTA, which is a chelator of heavy metals. It also blunts glycolysis or lowers it. And then there's pyruvate and lactate, and this is used for up to the first 3 days of culture. And then you move into a second step media, which adds in the essential amino acids, increases glucose levels, and also has pyruvate and lactate, and that's to meet the increasing metabolic needs of that developing embryo as it undergoes compaction and blastocyst formation. And by contrast, a single step media includes all of these from the start of embryo culture all the way to the end, and the embryo gets to quote unquote pick and choose what it wants to use. And the important thing here is that the component concentrations vary. So all sequential media are not the same. All single step media are not the same. This is just a general trend. And to not get too far off topic, certainly in our field, there's been a push more recently from Daniel Bryson and others who have published, but for others from a long time, to have more clarity into media composition for a variety of reasons. And certainly there's commercial interests, and we can all relate to why the commercial companies don't want to publish their recipes, but it really does make it a bit harder to make some scientific and educated decisions based on culture media when we don't know exactly what's in there. And it also makes it hard to compare We can do developmental comparisons or clinical outcome comparisons, but we really can't truly compare culture media when we don't know what exactly is in them and the concentrations. And so it becomes difficult to start doing some more in-depth analysis of determining, ideal culture media compositions when we as scientists and embryologists can't compare. If one media has a little bit more glucose than another. So it becomes difficult to understand why one media may be superior to another. And there's a variety of reasons of why one media approach may be selected over another. And these are just a few kind of debate points that if you're in your laboratory talking to your colleagues that often come up when labs are trying to determine between selecting a single step or a sequential media. One kind of argument used against sequential media is the measurement of substrate composition in the female reproductive tract, in the oviduct, in the uterus, that was used as the initial premise for those original sequential media really probably aren't that accurate. And so sequential media really aren't the quote unquote back to nature approach, because they're not really, especially currently, they're not really based on the composition of the female reproductive tract. Glucose is not inhibitory during cleavage development if formulated properly. And one could make the argument that exclusion is non-physiologic. There is glucose throughout the female reproductive tract. The levels may vary if we truly think that the measurements that we have are accurate, and that's debatable. The concerns with ammonia level buildup are likely overstated. Some of those early papers, we'll talk about some of those, probably overstated that problem, especially in light of current media compositions and the substrates that they use. And importantly, if ammonia levels are a concern, they can be addressed with either media approach, as we mentioned, through media exchange. So ammonia media can be changed with single step media and address an ammonia concern if that exists. EDTA is not inhibitory post-cleavage, is used at the right concentration, but it isn't physiologic. So EDTA is not found in the female reproductive tract. So including this throughout embryo culture or any time during embryo culture certainly isn't physiologic, but research has shown that it can be beneficial. Exclusion of the essential amino acids during cleavage stage, as done by sequential media, may not be wise based on a variety of studies, including amino acid turnover studies. It certainly isn't physiologic. Essential amino acids are present in the female reproductive tract. We certainly have not optimized the presence of amino acids in our culture media because we use commercially available mixtures. And so no media have optimized the amino acid profile. So when you start getting into the task of only giving certain amino acids, that becomes a slippery slope because we don't know which amino acids are used in at what specific stages. It's very difficult research to do. So I had mentioned some of this, but this is a abstract a couple of years ago from Sebastian Masterbrook and others that was presented at ASRM. And they just, you can see by the title, human uterine fluid composition is distinct from clinically used pre-implantation culture media. And really what they're trying to say is that culture media are not reflecting the composition of uterine fluid. And so, the premise that some of our culture media are based on what the female reproductive tract has in it isn't entirely true. And so overall, 32 out of 37 components were significantly different between uterine fluid and any of the tested culture media. More precisely, calcium, phosphate, lactate, pyruvate, albumin, and 21 amino acids were present at significantly different concentrations in the female reproductive tract. And then they list a variety of other systems. So the take-home point here is that none of our culture media are really accurately reflecting what the embryo is seen in the female reproductive tract. And that actually could be a good thing because that tells us that there's still things we can do to our culture media that may further improve upon our current developmental rates. We had mentioned ammonia. This was certainly a few years ago was kind of a bad word in embryology, certainly something that we were afraid of in the laboratory based on the literature that we were given primarily from Dr. David Gardner and Michelle Lane. And it's important to point out that a lot of these early studies utilized high levels of amino acids and did not test optimized media. Our media now are more optimized to address this particular concern because when the concern was raised, there are things that we could do to address it. One includes use of the dipeptide form of glutamine, either glycoglutamine or alanine glutamine. And so now by far, Most media include this dipeptide, not all, but most. And so I would recommend that you make sure that your media has this, especially if you're using a single step media. Additionally, amino acid levels can be adjusted to lower levels to avoid ammonia buildup. The prior measurements in some of those studies may not be overly accurate. And so here's an example that was published now 17 years ago. And they compared a variety of commercial media and looked at the rates of ammonia concentration. And it's interesting because one of these here, P1 and multiblast, you can see here falls in an immediate range in terms of ammonia production. P1 would be right up to about this point. And it's interesting because P1 doesn't have amino acids. So it's unclear as to how this particular media had more ammonia production than these two media down here. P1 only has 0.05 millimolar of taurine, as I recall. So very interesting as to how this measurement showed this much higher levels of ammonia versus these media that have a lot more amino acid in them. So just something to be aware of as we analyze that older literature as to how big of a concern ammonia really was. As we mentioned, you can change media with any media formulation at 48 or 72-hour intervals to reduce the ammonia buildup if that is a concern. And certainly, John Biggers published several papers expressing his concerns about the use of the model when trying to explore the detriment of ammonia in the culture media on offspring and embryo development. He had concerns about spiking the media with ammonium chloride and how relevant that was to the ammonia that would be produced from amino acid breakdown from normal embryo culture. Since those initial studies and concerns, there have been a few studies to indicate that ammonia production in modern culture media may not be as big of an issue as we were all initially led to believe once we made some of these modifications to media composition. This particular study from Tex Vermillier and Rebecca Gilbert was published and presented to ASRM back in 2012, and they indicated that the buildup of ammonia in the media was primarily from the media alone. I don't think that any surprise there. The levels in the presence of absence, in the presence of embryos, was 43 to 84 micromolars after 7 days of culture. So again, if you are only culturing to day 3 or day 5, your levels are going to be even lower than this. This was after 7 days. And so these are pretty low levels. The detected levels were well below the approximate 120 micromolar that was required to show a decrease in blast formation rates. And so it's important to note here that, maybe take 120 in this particular study to show decreased blastulation rates, but there could be more subtle impacts at lower levels. So certainly don't want to be dismissive, but these levels are quite a bit lower than this. 37.5 micromolar reduced cell numbers in mouse blastocysts, 75 induced fetal abnormalities. Most studies have used 300 micromolars when they've reported detriment. But you can see here that these levels are quite a bit lower after 7 days. So 3 or 5 days, especially with the media exchange, it appears to be much, much lower than the levels that you would accumulate here to show any sort of detriment. So just goes to show you that media exchange and modern media formulations have certainly decreased the amount of media production. That being said, again, I'm not trying to paint a picture here that sequential media aren't useful and aren't efficient. Certainly, sequential media work very well. We use sequential media in our laboratory. And from a physiological standpoint, there may still be a benefit in terms of sequential media when it comes to pH. I think most people expect me to at least mention pH based on my prior publications and literature. So I don't want to disappoint. And so changing pH during embryo culture may be beneficial. This is certainly controversial, hasn't been absolutely proven. But here's a preliminary study presented a couple of years ago at ESHRE from Marius Menkes here in the US and others. They used a sibling zygote split model using a single step media. They adjusted the pH on day 3 by adjusting CO2. In their control treatment, pH was stable. They set baseline time lapse morphokinetic endpoints and blast formation rates. And they then went to a low high pH paradigm and compared it to a high low pH paradigm. And interestingly, this would more closely mimic what the embryo would experience in the female reproductive tract, measuring pH in the oviduct versus the uterus. They saw higher blast formation rates and faster morphokinetic timings in this low high pH paradigm. So this would suggest that maybe changing pH or changing CO2 level, we haven't really determined which yet, could be beneficial. And so that is feasible with a sequential culture media. It's also feasible with a single-step culture media if you have different incubators and adjust their CO2. So just something to keep in mind that, the sequential approach in terms of changing some parameter during embryo development may still have some benefit, not necessarily changing metabolic composition of the culture media. It could be using a single step media and just changing the growth conditions in the incubator. So certainly an area worthy of continued research. People ask, well, why single step? And I think, especially with the increased adoption we've seen over the last few years. So those arguments tend to include that if acting as a chelator, perhaps EDTA should be present throughout embryo culture. If you truly think that heavy metals are an issue, they're an issue throughout, not just during cleavage stages. And so EDTA, may be useful throughout culture. It does not deprive embryos of key compounds during cleavage stages, as we mentioned, glucose and essential amino acids and other things. Uninterrupted culture becomes feasible. And this is probably the greatest reason why we've seen increased adoption of this approach recently. There's less handling and stress to cells, less in and out of the incubator, less chance for an adverse effect, less handling embryos and pipettes and potentially dropping or losing an embryo or mixing up embryos. And perhaps most importantly, it's conducive to time lapse. We've seen certainly overseas, outside the US, vast adoption of time lapse incubators as more technologies come out, and certainly single step media allow us to use that in an uninterrupted fashion to get those time lapse images of embryos. And the next logical question is whether to use single step media in an interrupted or uninterrupted fashion, meaning do we exchange media on day 3 or do we not? And like many things in our field, if you go through the literature, you're going to find a variety of answers. And so here's just a sampling of headlines or titles from papers that say, yes, uninterrupted culture using a single step media are beneficial, usually in terms of blastocyst development. But I can go out and find as many or more papers that say no, uninterrupted culture is not beneficial. So, I'm not trying to sway anyone here as to whether they use single step media or sequential media, or if they use single step media in an interrupted versus uninterrupted fashion. The take home point is this likely changes based on other factors in the laboratory. And when it comes to uninterrupted versus interrupted culture, I'm going to give a couple slides here that may be possible reasons why some labs see a benefit and other labs don't see a benefit. So I did want to highlight this particular article from Fujifilm Irvine Scientific that I helped write a few weeks ago about comparing embryo culture media. I think it's incumbent upon each laboratory to compare media. And that's not to say we have to compare every culture media out there. That becomes an impossible endeavor, really, with so many media out there. But we should, at least at some point in time, compare different media to make sure that we're still using a media that's giving us the highest blastocyst outcome. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can talk to reps, you can look at data in the literature, you can go to meetings and into the exhibit hall and look at new products, but you really need to test it under your laboratory conditions to see how it functions. And so, in terms of media comparisons, ideally, if publishing, they should be randomized trials. We should compare true sequential and single step media that were developed using modern formulations, not early media that really we know are suboptimal. There are publications out there like in HTF and P1, and those were fantastic 15, 20 years ago because those were the media that were the benchmark. But moving forward, we really need to make sure we're comparing modern embryo culture media with modern formulations. They should include culture up to day 5 or day 6 to assess efficacy of the entire system. Importantly, perhaps most importantly, they need to control for other variables in the culture system. They should likely use sibling oocyte splits, looking at the right time frame, controlling for protein, incubators, and other additives. Importantly, you have to use the media as recommended, making sure that you're using the pH in the recommended range, that you're not somehow changing that media unknowingly. And you should compare objective outcomes, clinical outcomes, and avoid commercial bias. That's hard. And so really the question is, do these studies exist? These are really hard things to do, especially in the clinical setting, because this is not a research lab where you're dealing with patient embryos. And so we are a bit limited as to how we can do some of these things. Certainly there are published reviews trying to determine if there's a quote unquote better embryo culture media. And here's just one review from a few years ago from Sebastian Maschenbroek and others. They looked at 22 random control trials, evaluating 31 different comparisons. Meta-analysis, it was not possible for the outcomes because they all compare different culture media. You really can't do a single trial to compare all media. It's impossible. Only 4 trials reported live birth. 1 of them reported a significant difference. 9 trials reported on ongoing or clinical pregnancy rates. Pooling of data did not reveal a superior culture media. So I don't think it's any surprise going through the literature, you're not going to be able to determine which culture media is best. There's just too many variables. And as I said, how a media performs can vary from lab to lab based on other variables in the system. In terms of going back to the question of whether there's a superior media approach, single versus sequential media, this is a paper from Melissa Mann and her group from 2010 in Biology of Reproduction, looking at a side-by-side comparison of 5 commercial media systems in the mouse model, so not human, but the mouse is one of the better models that we have at our disposal, looking at the impacts of these media on imprinting. And what they concluded was sequential media systems did not seem to confer an advantage with respect to maintenance of genomic imprinting compared to their single-step counterparts, nor did medium renewal. So, trying to move to an endpoint assessment beyond just embryo development, at least in this particular study, it didn't look like one media approach was impacting gene imprinting at a significant rate compared to another one. So there are a variety of laboratory controlled factors that can absolutely impact how a culture media can function. And I've mentioned this now several times. Certainly, commercial IVF media production has been a huge contributor to our improved consistency and success in the IVF lab. No longer do we have to make our own culture media, where water quality can be a huge variable. The media manufacturers have done a fantastic job of improving that consistency, pre-testing media, and giving us a ready-to-use product. However, the lab still may inadvertently alter the properties of this culture media during use. And one of the easiest ways, one of the primary ways that this happens, especially now with new modern culture incubators that don't use humidification, is through evaporation. And if culture media evaporates even slight amounts during culture, media osmolality can change and pH can change. And this certainly can impact the ability of that culture media to support embryo development. There are certain procedures that have increased likelihood for evaporation and this potential impact. Dish preparation, specifically making microdrops. And now several groups have shown that can occur. Evaporation can occur if you don't work quickly and take proper precautions. And specifically uninterrupted culture, especially now in dry incubators, dry benchtop incubators, and certainly dry time-lapse incubators. So this evaporation and these issues can actually be amplified through use of a single-step media, specifically using uninterrupted culture fashion. So although we're trying to reduce stress on the embryos that we're culturing by not handling them, using it in an interrupted fashion, this could actually increase stress because of evaporation. And so I tried to highlight some of these points last year in a short article in RBM Online, talking about the potential risks of uninterrupted embryo culture if you didn't take the correct precautionary approaches. And so certainly we talked about the benefits of uninterrupted culture, but there are risks of media degradation, missing information, VOC accumulation, depending on your air quality and quality of the gas in your supply tanks. But you can see here also potential evaporation resulting in pH and osmolality increase, and also mineral oil degradation. So certainly, uninterrupted culture can be a fantastic approach, but you do also have to take in mind that there are some risks that are avoidable if you know about them and take precautions. And so, just to quickly highlight some of this, if evaporation occurs during uninterrupted culture, osmolality will increase. We put microdrops under mineral oil in our dry benchtop case systems incubator for up to 7 days. And we compared it to our humidified box type incubators. And you can see that in the dry incubator, after 72 hours, which would be about 3 days, 2 days of culture, if you consider, the first day is the equilibration stage, you see a significant difference in osmolality. By the end of the culture period, 7 days, 6 days, if you take into account media equilibration, you're right around 300 milliosmolar. And this is the level where we see compromised embryo development. And again, it's not to say that there might be more subtle changes back here, but certainly you don't see this amount of evaporation when you have a humidified incubator. So the take-home point here is that we had evaporation. The solution would be to change the amount of oil over the dishes, or do media exchange, or take some other approach to avoid evaporation being the concern. Others have replicated this data. This is a publication from a couple years ago presented at iHera by Dean Morbeck and his colleagues, showing that even in the most modern embryo culture dishes made for time-lapse, Miri time-lapse dish, Primo Vision time-lapse dish, EmbryoScope time-lapse dish, that you still get evaporation under oil over time. And so you can see here on day 3, they measured osmolality of media under oil in these particular dishes versus their control. At 5 days, increase in osmolality increases evaporation. After 7 days, further increased osmolality due to evaporation. So again, this can be addressed, but the point is that it is happening, and it's important to determine whether it is happening in your laboratory under your conditions. Certainly, certain conditions reduce or increase the amount of evaporation that occur. So in conclusion, there is no convincing evidence that one media approach is superior to another in terms of outcomes. Both media, single step and sequential, can work extremely well if we control for the various variables. Rationale for sequential media has been really largely debunked at this point in time. It works, but some of that original rationale I don't think holds true. You know, it's really not a back to nature approach. It does not replicate the female reproductive tract composition. There are some logistical advantages to single step media. However, it is important to note that extra precautions may be required if using it in an uninterrupted fashion with no media change. The lab really must test and decide on a media in their lab setting to determine which is going to operate best. It's not always as easy as asking your colleague, hey, what media do you like? What media works well in your lab? It may not translate to your lab if you don't have the exact same incubators, if you don't use the exact same oil, if you don't use the same microdrop size. There's a number of issues that also have to be controlled for. And I think, as I mentioned briefly early on, I think there's still room for improvement, especially based on some of those studies by Sebastian Masterbrook, that there are other components in the female reproductive tract that aren't interculture media. That could be a heavy lift from a regulatory standpoint when we start talking about growth factors and other things. But I think there's still room for improvement, and it'll be exciting to see what the future holds when it comes to culture media. So that concludes my talk, and I'd like to open up for questions and turn it back over to our moderators.
Thank you, Dr. Swan. Such nice and elaborate description. I don't think there is much of queries left, but still we have an open session for question answers. Basically, I just want to ask you from my side one very basic question, which might look silly, but for a junior level technician, that might be an interesting question. Do you have any other way to find out the pH other than measuring CO2 percentage or actual pH in the incubator?
Yeah, so I mean, the only way to assess pH is to measure pH, right? So that's always what I recommend. And fortunately, there's a number of ways to measure pH. You can get a benchtop pH meter. You can buy a blood gas analyzer. The nice thing that a lot of media companies have started offering is that their technical reps, when they're allowed to get to the lab and go in the lab, many of them now have portable blood gas analyzers that they can bring with them. And so they've started offering that as a service just to verify, sometimes for selfish reasons, because they want to make sure the client's using the media properly. They can measure pH if a lab doesn't have access to those, specifically blood gas analyzers. But no, I don't know of another way to actually determine the pH other than measuring it, because even studying CO2 levels, right? CO2 levels will vary if you use a different protein, or if you add more protein or less protein. You'll require a different CO2 level than another lab that uses perhaps different protein. And so CO2 is certainly the way to adjust pH, but it's not going to tell you what the pH is, because other factors impact pH. And I know others, you can go through and do your calculations with Henderson-Hasselbalch calculations, but those aren't going to be really accurate, because it doesn't necessarily take into the impact of elevation. If you change elevation, you have to adjust your CO2 concentration. So unfortunately, the best way to determine which pH you're using and make sure that it's in the recommended range is to measure it. And then the next step is to try to find, an easily accessible tool to do that measurement.
Okay, thank you. Now I will put it over to Dr. Shukla. He will be asking the questions which has been put forward by the participants. Dr. Shukla, are you there?
Yes, yes. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Jason, it's always exciting to hear you. There are a few questions, some interesting ones also. But before we go to the attendees' question, there is one question from my side. We have seen a recent shift from our classical benchtop incubators to the not the benchtop incubators, the box type incubators to the bench type incubators. And in India, most of those benchtop incubators, they are supplied a pre-mixed gas. So we are not at the luxury of adjusting the pH and CO2 concentrations. So do you have any suggestions to our juniors and newcomers and practicing embryologists how to deal with this when they are using the benchtop incubators with premixed gas, with sequential or the single step medium?
Yeah, it's great question. Common issue even here in the U.S. The first thing is to make sure that you're getting or requesting the correct mixture. So again, the way to do that is to measure pH. And so, it's pretty common for people to use 6% CO2, but when you get your tanks, you gas a dish or a tube with your culture media, let it equilibrate, and determine whether, what mixture you need. You might need 6.5% CO2, you might need 7% CO2. And so then your gas manufacturer should be able to present you the proper mixture to get the pH with your culture media. And it's important that if you change culture media, if you do a trial, you may need a different CO2 level. That's actually very common because media are made differently. So that's the one kind of hiccup with the pre-mixed tanks is you do have to verify that the mixture is what you want it to be. And then when you get those tanks, verify that it is that. So we had a recent issue in one of our laboratories where we had a trial in a new time-lapse incubator, needed a pre-mixed tank. We had verified that, around 6% CO2 gave us the pH that we needed. So we ordered that 6% CO2 tank and we got it, we hooked it up. It was a brand new incubator, so we hadn't really calibrated it yet, and it was reading higher than 6%. And we're like, well, it's a pre-mixed tank. We have a certificate of analysis from the gas manufacturer saying it's 6%, but our incubator is saying it's closer to 7%. So we measured pH. Our pH was way too low. And so we went back to investigate and we started looking, and well, the certificate of analysis said 6% plus or minus 2%. We're like, well, that's a pretty wide range. And then we looked on the tank and it was a dirty, rusty tank. And we kind of rubbed off this sticker on the side and it said it was actually a 7% CO2 tank. So they had shipped us an improper tank. And so we wanted 6%, we didn't get 6%. So, there's just an example of how, quality control is really required. And so what we do is we assess each tank as we hook it up. We do kind of a test. I know some labs, before they hook it up, will have a hose attached to it, gas a test tube or gas a bag, put media in there and verify it before they hook it up to the incubator. So can certainly be done, can certainly work very well. There's some advantages to premixed tanks in terms of, being able to filter VOCs and have stability, but you do want to make sure that the mixture is what you want it to be, and that they're sending you what you've requested.
That's great. So the key message is to check pH before you start culturing in the different medium, which was not your standard medium.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. Even I had an incident wherein the supplier mistakenly supplied us an oxygen cylinder instead of a triple gas mixture. So what I did is I kept just one hippies based buffer, and I saw that there is no change in the color. I was expecting it to be acidic if I keep it in the CO2 atmosphere. So I saved the precious embryos, and we cultured in the our classical incubator.
Yeah.
So yeah, a great message to the embryologists. Justin, you showed that there is a study that's showing imprinting defects and similar studies. But can you mention any study showing the aneuploidy rates? I mean, the comparison of single step and sequential media showing the aneuploidy.
Yeah, and there's a variety. Most of them that I can think of are in abstract form. So certainly, if you look at ASRM this year, really any year, there are no shortages of studies comparing embryo culture media. We ourselves have one this year where we compared a sequential versus single-step culture media. So now with more and more facilities using PGTA, that's an easy endpoint that people are now including in their comparisons of culture media, other than just blast formation or pregnancy rate. So yes, I can't think of any specific publications in the peer-reviewed literature right now that look at that particular endpoint, but they certainly are out there. There are any number of abstracts, and like many things, it varies. And so in our particular hands, we had a single-step media that we liked. We compared it against our benchmark sequential. We were seeing more blast assists in the single-step media. And so we're like, hey, we want to make this change. We went back and looked at the aneuploidy rates, and we actually saw a pretty big uptick in aneuploidy. And so we said, okay, well, wait, let's slow down. So, the take-home point is, it's especially if you do PGTA, it's a good endpoint to look at because it's an additional endpoint. Blast formation is certainly a high priority too, but it's not the only endpoint to look at. And so we then went back and looked at a different single-step media, and we saw improved blast development and then similar aneuploid outcomes. And there was a very small trial. It was just an abstract, like 20 or 30 patients, but certainly, gave us reason to pause and go back and do a deeper assessment. So yes, there are studies out there. I don't think you're going to find convincing data one way or the other. I think it's going to be like a lot of things that under our conditions, for whatever reason, that particular culture media over those 20 or 30 patients gave us higher aneuploidy. But I know other colleagues who use that same media who have fantastic outcomes. So, it's one of those things that just it may vary over time or from lab to lab. But yes, it is a valid endpoint, a good endpoint to look at if you are going to do a media comparison.
Perfect. Justin, do you have some more time? Can we?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So another thing is, which is like, of course, you explained in your talk also, but someone has asked that, do we need to change the dishes on day 3 if we are culturing in a single step medium? Especially, I think they are concerned about the humidity.
Yeah. So you don't need to, and there are a lot of labs who don't. We are trialing single step media, and we found after a variety of studies that a single change on day 3 in our lab with this particular single step media was giving us the highest outcomes. And we compared 3 media changes to replicate what we were doing with our benchmark sequential media, changing every 48-hour intervals. And then we compared it to a single change on day 3, and we saw a single change on day 3 was better than 3 changes, and a single change on day 3 in our hands was better than uninterrupted. But I know several colleagues that have shown that uninterrupted works better in their hands. And so because our incubator is dry, because of the size of our microdrops, because of how much oil we use, for us, a single change on day 3 was better. But that may not necessarily be the case in another laboratory. And that's really why it's important for that lab to test. So it's certainly not required, but in some labs, yes, it may be beneficial.
Fantastic. Here is another question. It's not related to our today's topic, but it is based on your work on the buffer media, Wirtz buffer. So Joel Bose asks, do you have any preference in using either hippies or mogs for ICSI, because they work differently?
No, so no, I have no preference. Certainly I can see the question here, and from prior publications, we can get into the pKa values and the optimal buffering based on temperature. And so heaps, based on strictly pKa value and optimal buffering range and where we use our embryos, HEAPS from a buffering perspective is probably best suited for pH stability and on how we use it. But that doesn't talk about potential toxicity or other benefits or detriments of MOPS versus HEAPS. So I don't have a preference. I'm not aware of any literature that says MOPS or HEAPS are more or less toxic to embryos, but from a pH buffering standpoint, HEAPS is better suited based on what we did. And there are now 2 companies that actually have created a combination buffering system to try to take the best of both, where they do a mixture of MOPS and HEAPS in a handling media for things like sperm prep or ICSI or biopsy. So there are products out there that combine, which I would argue is if there's a concern, those products are pretty nice to have because it then gives you the benefits of both buffers.
Yeah, I remember one of your experiments putting in the goods buffer in the culture medium also, but I'm not sure whether that study continued or not.
Yeah, I was just looking through some old articles the other day. I saw that too, because we went up to 50 micromolar or 50 millimolar of buffer, and embryos growing them, which shows that they're really not toxic. But when you put them into the incubator, the main driving force of pH is the CO2 and the bicarbonate. And so even when we put in huge amounts of buffer, when you took them out of the incubator, when the CO2 off-gassed, the pH would still change. And so the buffer, might affect that a little bit, but there was no way to keep pH completely stable. So because of that, going back to kind of media formulation and keep it simple, certainly MOPS and HEAPS aren't physiologic. They're not in the female reproductive tract. So I think, most people would agree that, well, if it's not going to keep pH completely stable, then why would we put it in the culture media if it's not needed?
Perfect. So I think most of the questions you have already answered in your talk, and they are pretty similar. One question, let me modify it a bit because I don't see any rationale behind this. Because someone asks, can we use fertilization media, different medium from the sequential one, and then change over to single step media for ICSI and further culture?
Sure. It's, people kind of do that quite often. They kind of come up with their own mixture. Certainly in our labs, we use a combination of media from a variety of manufacturers. We use a sperm wash media from one company, prep the sperm. Then we use a culture media from another company that we, put the eggs into, and a culture media from another company that we put the embryos into. So fertilization media is similar in composition to culture media. It adjusts glucose levels and things like that for sperm. But IVF media, if it's for standard insemination, is formulated to try to meet the metabolic needs of the sperm and the egg and the cumulus cells. So it can certainly be done. And again, that's where it gets hard, as I mentioned, without us knowing exactly what's in fertilization media. Quite frankly, it could be identical to somebody else's cleavage media. We just don't know. And so, that's why you do splits, why you do testing. I think most people would agree that, it shouldn't be toxic. You should, if you have a fertilization media, you should be able to put a 2-cell embryo in there, and it shouldn't kill the embryo. Now, it may not be optimized for the embryo development. I don't know, since I don't know the concentrations, but all of our media shouldn't be toxic. I should be able to put a blastocyst in a cleavage media and not have it die. It may not develop as well because it doesn't have as high levels of glucose. So to me, that's just a variation on a theme. Fertilization media versus cleavage media, or fertilization media moving into a single step media. There should be no reason why that couldn't work. And you just have to kind of test it in your laboratory.
Yeah. So to change over completely, you must first experiment with your surplus embryos, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think most people are comfortable with that idea. And a common approach is, hey, we'll use our current system. We know what we expect. And so we'll start off with a few patients, generally younger patients with higher eggs, just so that you can have some eggs to split. And some people will say, well, I'm gonna put 3 or 4 eggs from these younger patients into the new system, track embryo development, do this for a week or two, and then let me sit back and look. Okay, they're comparable. Now I'll do 50-50 split. So I'll put half the eggs in the new system, leave half my old, do another week or two, get 5, 10, 20 patients. And then if everything looks comparable or better, then make the change. If it doesn't, the question then comes up, well, do I change? Do I not change? And there's other reasons to change too, right? There are certainly financial reasons. If you're getting the media for cheaper and you're getting the same outcomes, everyone understands that there's economics at play too. But I think it's important to do it in a stepwise fashion, and then also to have a plan ahead of time of what will constitute a change. No difference, or does it have to be better? If better, what's better? 2%, 5%? Those aren't always easy questions to answer, but you do want to have a clear plan and let everyone know what that plan is, so that after you do the split, to let you do the splits in the right way, so that you don't start splitting things and then at the end be like, well, this data isn't valid. It wasn't split properly. I can't compare these, they're apples and oranges. And then when you do get the splits done, that everyone's in agreement on whether we change or not. And it's often easier to do that if you predetermine what the reasons would be from the start. Hey, we want to see at least as good blast development to make this change because it saves us money or it saves us time, whatever the case may be.
Perfect. So I'm sure that the audience has got the message. So Dr. Ved, do you have any more questions? And
I think we have to actually, we already took too much time, and because we promised to take only half an hour from Dr.
All
Jesse.
right. So
I think he has to leave, he has to go to work. So thank you so much, Dr. Jason, to joining us for a wonderful session. I thanks on behalf of iHera to you, and looking forward to on your next
session with us.
next webinar with us. So
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So today I will not take too much time. I ask Dr. Sanket, please share your screen.
Yes, sir.
So,
is it visible, sir?
Yeah, it is visible. Thank you. On behalf of iHera, I welcome all of you. Dear all, we are very excited today to launch 3 things together. As you know, in past, we have done 8 webinars on different aspects. Can you move it? Yeah, please. So thanks to all of you for making them a huge success. So these are the all webinars we have done in the past. And I won't take too much time and invite my co-founder, Dr. Charudha Joshi, to launch our website. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Ved. I would like to launch our website. Launch, please.
Can you please move it, Sanket?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
This
please
is the
move it.
website.
Yeah. So again, we have to launch one more thing, our upcoming mega event logo. I request Dr. Sanjay Shukla, please launch this.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And I'm sure everyone would like this. This is a perfect logo. And what an idea from our young team to give it a name, embART. Here we go. Here our logo of this wonderful mega event that is coming up soon.
Again, I request our Yuva team, who have done very hard work to introduce our newsletter. I invite all of them, Dr. Rahul Sen, Dr. Sanket Dhumal, Dr. Akash Agrawal, Dr. Presh Makwana, to launch this newsletter, please. Rahul, you are there?
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm there.
Yeah. Please launch this.
Yes. Thank you,
It's
sir.
a great pleasure, sir, to be working under your guidance, and we are very, very excited to launch this newsletter. So, Sanket, please go ahead.
Yes. It's called as Nucleus, and this is just the cover page of the newsletter. It will be out soon by tomorrow morning.
Yeah, very good. So they have done very good work for that. I think 4 days they are continuously doing hard work to launch this newsletter. Thanks to your team. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, sir.
Honor is all of us.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
So I'll stop sharing the screen.
Yeah. Please, you have to stop. So we will move to our next session, panel discussion. Dr. Charuja Joshi, please take over. I am sharing my screen. Please introduce Dr. Priya Kannan and Dr. Sarappreet.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So once again, it is pleasure to introduce our past president, Dr. Priya. Presently, she is Director, Clinical Embryology at Garbha Rakshambi Fertility Center, and she has authored so many chapters in the book. And I also welcome Dr. Sarappreet Singh. It is a pleasure to introduce him. He is also a very good friend of mine and a very academic person. He has done his MD from AIMS. He is a senior consultant and chief embryologist at Archimedes Health Institute since 2009. He is IFS and ISHRA certified senior clinical embryologist. He is convener for IFS SIG Special Interest Group Clinical Embryology 1820. He is awarded for the best convener special interest group in Fertivision 1820. Champion of ISAR Award is presented to him at ISAR Conference 2020. And presently is convener for IFS SIG Applied Genetics 2022. So it is over to Dr. Priya and Dr. Sarappreet.
Priya, I will move the slides. You can introduce your panelist. Okay.
Where is Sarah?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ved and Charu and iHera for this opportunity to meet all of you again with a very interesting topic of is IVF going to go off, is going to be extinct or whichever. There are two ways of interpreting this, but myself and Sarah, we chose to interpret IVF as per se as a method of insemination, not as a thing of this ART, IVF, going to go off in some time. It is my pleasure to have esteemed people on the panel. Dr. Vijay Mongali sir, he's probably I've known him ever since I got into IVF, and even before that he was like, he's somebody we all have looked up to when we learned our embryology. He is now the lab director at the Fertility Clinic and IVF Center, Mumbai. He was the Secretary General for ISAR 2009 to 11 and Chairperson Embryology ISAR 2014 to 16. And he's published many papers in reviewed journals. He's presented many papers in conferences as well and has authored chapters. He's a recipient of Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. Alex Verghese is our next panelist, and he is also the scientific director of Astra Fertility Group, Canada, and the laboratory director in Kraft IVF. He was the past president of ACE. That's an important thing that he's with us today. And his area of interest is in developing automated systems for IVF. And he's published a lot of 19 research articles in peer-reviewed journals and an indexed and more than 1,360 citations, and has also edited 9 books in ART. He believes in responsible reproduction through ethical practices, low-cost IVF, which is to be for everyone, but with quality management and safe practices and to safeguard the health of IVF children. He is on the executive committee of the special group in andrology in Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society. And as I already said, he is a past president of ACE India. Sapna is a dear friend, and she's a lab director in Mamta Fertility Hospital, Hyderabad. Dr. Devan Patel is the regional manager for Nova Fertility Ahmedabad. He's got his MDSc from Indian Veterinary Research Institute. He's a master's degree in biotechnology of human assisted reproduction and embryology from EB, Valencia, Spain. He's been working in ART since 2007 and in bovine ART from 2002. He's been awarded the Hall of Fame for the West Zone by ET Healthcare Awards 2019. With that, we would go on to the panel. Sarah?
Yeah. I'm sharing the screen now. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes. It is visible. Do you want to? Yes, that's a better one.
I've magnified, the screen. So, good evening, all of you. And thanks, Dr. Ved, Dr. Shukla, and Dr. Charu, and the whole iHera team for inviting me for this wonderful panel discussion. When Ved approached me regarding this panel is IVF a thing of the past. The first thought which came to my mind was that, we should actually rename it, let's make IVF popular again, something like that, because it is something which is getting extinct, and we should actually, touch upon the pertinent concerns for regarding IVF, in which cases it works, in which cases you should avoid doing IVF, rather than adopt a, blanket all ICSI approach, which is seen nowadays. The only centers which are doing IVF is, which don't have an ICSI machine, more like startups kind of thing. So let's get on with this wonderful session with Dr. Priya and the esteemed panel, Dr. Sapna, Dr. Alex, Dr. Devan, and Dr. Vijay Mangoli, the senior most amongst all. I'm not sure about Alex is senior or Dr. Vijay. So anyway, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to start. ICSI was introduced as an add-on procedure add-on to in vitro fertilization for couples with severe male infertility. But slowly and steadily, people started using it for even mild male infertility. And now even for normozoospermic men, ICSI is preferred. There is no reason for that, but the trend is same all across the globe. It's same in Europe, America. I was reading about the Chinese data where for every 3 cases, in 2 cases they do ICSI, and in 1 case they go for IVF. So, which is quite surprising. Even Indian scenario is more or less the same. So I would like to ask Dr. Vijay, what is the possible reason for the decreased use of IVF or increased use of ICSI? Dr. Vijay, are you there?
Yes. Okay. Possible reason for decrease in the use of IVF and increase the use of ICSI. There are multiple reasons for this, as I can see over past 30 years, because when we started IVF in mid-80s till up to mid-90s, because I think ICSI as such started in 93, 94, and it became popular in next 4 to 5 years. But till then, everyone was obviously stick to IVF procedures. But yes, there were advantages of IVF, and we knew that we could, at that time, under those circumstances, could achieve the fertilization rate of up to 60 to 70%, and pregnancy rate were ranging between 15% to around 22 to 25%. But consider those are the initial stages of IVF without any proper advancements of the scientific things that we have right now. As far as the ICSI is concerned, we were facing at that time a lot of problem, particularly for the male factors, particularly for the oligozoospermic patients where we don't have sufficient sperms, particularly for the teratozospermic patients where we could not select the proper sperms for the injections, And these were the main limitations. And plus, of course, as we progress further for the TISA and PISA, we didn't have any answer for that, how to fertilize those. So those were the things where ICSI played a very, very crucial role as far as for getting fertilization and getting babies to these couples. But I still feel that ICSI may not be, or ICSI is not the complete substitute, should not be complete substitution for normal IVF. That is what my personal opinion is. Because there is something what is called as a natural selection, which we don't really have understood the process of sperm binding, which sperm goes to and binds the egg and fertilizes it. Because here we are dictating the terms while doing ICSI based upon our little knowledge of morphology, particularly morphology, because under the inverted microscope, we don't have any other means to select the sperm, but only based on the morphology, which may not correlate with the chromosomal normalcy or other fertilizing ability of the sperm, because we have understood that even the ICSI does not give us a complete 100% fertilization. So these are some of the reasons that why IVF became slightly less important, as we thought that ICSI may be the reason and may be the answer to all fertilization failures.
Sir, if I may ask, sir, in your lab, what is the proportion of IVF to ICSI in a normospermic person? I mean, leave alone other things.
Well, if the patient is coming, if the couple is coming for the first time, we definitely would like to go for maximum IVF, because we don't, unless and until when we counsel the patient, we talk to the patient at that time, these things are told to the patient. If the patient is aged, slightly aged, then we ask patient that this is the case, and we would like to go for partly ICSI to avoid a situation of failed fertilization. If the patient is completely young patient and is coming, then we give the preference for the complete IVF.
So your first choice for an unexplained fertility or normospermic with even advanced maternal age is IVF, or
well,
let's say, sir, for unexplained fertility, you would prefer IVF, or you go for split insemination, sir?
Split ICSI means IVF and ICSI. This is completely to avoid the situation of no fertilization.
Of total fertilization failure. But given your experience with IVF, sir, why do you think you still have to go for split ICSI?
Because
sir, obviously we came into the era when ICSI was like always there, and it was like that. You started with IVF. Your expertise in IVF is so much more than anything. So why do you still go for that split ICSI, sir?
That is because many times we have experienced that in spite of very good count, very good motility, there are certain factors, certain immunological factors, or certain factors which you can say, for example, SFTs, that the ectosome lacking. These are the factors which we cannot see, in the population under the light microscope or the inverted microscope either. So in that case, we have observed that in spite of this, there is no fertilization. And these are the things that we have to avoid in future, because now we have got option.
Yes. So for the safety sake, you said you prefer to go for split ICSI. I mean, safety of avoiding TFF.
Right. Safety as well as the fear of fertilization failure. Yeah. There is a huge cost is also involved.
I guess. Alex,
would you like to add something?
I do agree with Dr. Vijay. The reason is that why ICSI has become so popular. Some people say that it is because of the standardization. When you talk about the technologies in the IVF for laboratories, ICSI is one of the field, I think, that was highly standardized. And another thing is that fear. Like, we don't want to face the fear. There's a fear psychosis among the professionals to face the fertilization failures. That could be one of the reasons. And as Dr. Vijay said, recently the 2020 the ASRM practice committee has come out with the recommendations. They don't recommend ICSI for the non-male factor infertility, and even they don't say anything about the unexplained fertility, even though some papers shows that the better pregnancy with the ICSI practice. So I think it should be based on the cases. And also, like he has mentioned, even if you say normozoospermic samples, maybe when you do conventional IVF, there is a chance of failed fertilization. And we don't have the armamentarium of the test to find the functional status of the sperm before we inseminate. That is another area that need real scrutinization.
I agree with you, Dr. Alex. Like I always say that IVF is an art and ICSI is a well standardized technique. So technique is something which people can master, but art is something which you have to learn. So moving on to the first question now. A couple, husband 36 years of age, wife 35 years, married for the last 4 years. They present with inability to conceive. This is going to be the common complaint in all the questions, I think. Wife's reports are normal. Husband's semen reports are volume is 4 ml, concentration is 63. Everything is normal in motility except for the morphology, which is 2% normal, but then such good count can compensate for the morphology. The wife's reports are all normal. Husband has grade 2 varicocele on left side, which is subclinical. So they have undergone 3 cycles of IUI, but all of them failed. So we plan an ovarian stimulation followed by oocyte retrieval and ET for them. So in such a case, which most likely is a case of idiopathic or unexplained infertility, what Dr. Alex, would you like to order any investigations for the husband, or would you directly proceed with your technique of choice? I mean, would you like to treat the husband?
Yeah, definitely, because when you talk about the varicocele in the patient, we know that varicocele is associated with the high DNA fragmentation. So definitely you should ask for the DFI testing for this patient. And second, based on that, you should take the treatment forward. And if possible, if a microvaricocelectomy is possible in the clinic, that can be done because the study shows that it improves even the IVF outcome. Second thing is that what you have to choose. The case that you have presented here, it has got less than 2%, I think less than 2% morphology. Other parameters are normal. Yeah. So this year there is a study from China, around 5,000 patients. They looked into the varicocele patient, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3, IVF versus ICSI. They found a better live birth with ICSI. And the discussion they are telling, varicocele patient, the oxidative stress is high in the sperm. So when you co-incubate the sperm 19 hours, 16 or 19 hours, that can have some kind of effect. That is the conclusion they say about the conventional IVF. Maybe I think if somebody want to go with the conventional insemination, maybe the short incubation may be the best. Would be the best option for this kind of cases if you want to go for the split case.
Sapna?
Yes. So Priya, it's I think we've done a lot of work on DFI, you know that. Yeah. Some 8,000 cases documented so far. SCSA is the method of choice that we use, and we use it only for such kind of cases where they've failed in the past, they are unexplained. And from what we have seen, Priya, is that doing a varicocele ligation in a clinical varicocele, that's the only place we would ligate. Only when there is a clinical varicocele, because we know that the ROS is generated in higher levels. The antioxidant capacity in the semen is lower. So there is an imbalance, and that could probably lead to, the raised temperature, the toxins, everything put together leading to high DFI. We have seen high DFI in such males, and many of those people who come to us are also slightly older. They're smokers, they're diabetics, they're obese, and the environmental stress, and we are living in Hyderabad. We have a lot of techie crowd who have these night shifts and everything, So yes, smoking is there, alcohol is there. So DFI does play a role. And if there is a clinical varicocele, we are ligating. We are waiting for 6 weeks to 3 months. We are waiting and seeing for improvement. Definitely counts are better. Morphology improves. And like I agree with Dr. Alex, functionality improves. Definitely the embryo quality is better. People who have failed previously have done better. So yes, I'm favorable for DFI to be used in such scenarios, especially in unexplained. This woman is 35 years old. There is teratozoospermia. There is a clinical, it's a grade 2. That means only when there is a Valsalva, it is visible. So I don't know about that, whether you can ligate or not ligate, will it help? But a clinical varicocele, you must, I think we should ligate.
So in this case of such minimal varicocele,
yes,
do you go for IVF or ICSI?
So in this case, Priya, I think teratospermia, I would, counts are excellent, morphology is bad. Yeah. Motility is excellent, but she hasn't conceived in 3 IUIs and she's married 4 years. So I would still say I will do a split, Priya. I'm not a proponent of going direct IVF because failed fertilization in unexplained, quite in sibling oocytes also, it has been shown at 15 to 18%. So in cohort studies, in in a meta-analysis, if you see, also failed fertilization is up to 25%. In sibling splits also, you have seen it at least 15%. So I don't know, she's 4 years married and she's 35. Age does not really play she's 35. And age does not really play a big role. We know that at 40, even if you get one oocyte, you still do IVF or ICSI, it's comparable. Fertilization rates are comparable. And also, even if you get fertilization and you may get a lower fertilization, but look at it, Priya, if she gets, let's say, 10 oocytes and she has a fertilization rate of 55% in IVF, 65% in ICSI, you're getting 1 embryo more, right? That 1 embryo out of, let's say here you get 6 embryos, there you get 7 embryos, you're going to freeze anyway. You are going to do a fresh transfer and you're going to do freezing anyway. So does it really improve outcome, Priya? Cumulatively, if you see, IVF or ICSI,
that's the whole point now,
if you look at the data,
live birth rate may differ,
you may get 1 embryo extra, which will go into the freeze.
But what we are looking out here is to see practicality of, you can say many things on the paper, but are we
that
ready
is why
to go
I
straight
prefer
only for IVF for all these
I would
people?
prefer split, Priya. I would prefer split.
Okay.
Because I don't want to fail and face the fertilization failure in my patient. I think for me, Priya, only when there is a woman with a previous pregnancy in the past, a missed abortion or an ectopic pregnancy.
Any secondary infertility.
Any secondary infertility is pure IVF only when the sperm count is good. And
you
my
have the confidence to go and do only pure IVF.
Yes.
Let us
because we are the ones who started with IVF first, right? Yeah. So we know how to do it, I think. So all secondaries. And when I see a count of 20 million, Priya, and I see 50% are motile, my cutoff is 50%. If it is 30 to 50%.
Your 20 with 50%, is it pre-wash or post-wash?
Pre-wash.
Okay.
Always pre-wash per ml. Post-wash, you may get because of the volume. Never go by post-wash. My thing is pre-wash, at least 20 million.
So you're talking about the concentration, not the total count.
Yeah. Not the total count. So if it's 50% are motile, you get at least 10 million motile sperm, good sperm. I would still say IVF is a good option. The fertilization rates are comparable. You may get maybe 1 embryo more with ICSI. But then maybe you're doing more damage than, let nature select. Let nature select. So for for non-male factor, I would definitely say, in this case, unexplained, I would say split.
Split, okay. So I guess everybody is going, let's talk about, what about the NOAA protocol, Dr. Devan Patel?
Okay, so normally we like 100% cases ICSI, but we do split ICSI wherever, as Swapna ma'am mentioned, that whenever we are having secondary infertility cases, we may prefer split. But our
in all of the
protocol is mostly
only ICSI.
Yes.
Oh, great. So Sarab, I think we can go for the next one.
So I would like to add that splitting of oocytes is useful when 6 or more oocytes are retrieved in cases of infertility. I mean, it's not that you get 5.
I think, Sarab, I read a lot of articles where they said 5. 5 is a good idea. 5, because Poseidon, all the Poseidon 1, 2, 3, 4 will come into 5. So we can use it even in that, Sarab. Even 5 oocytes, there have been papers where 5 oocytes you can still split. You can do 3 ICSI and 2 IVF and still be safe.
That's a personal choice, but then this is what the...
Yes.
So different opinions again, but if you look at the meta-analysis, it favors the use of ICSI to decrease the risk of total fertilization failure in patients with unexplained infertility.
Correct.
So even ASRM 2020, it says that there is limited evidence that ICSI is going to improve the live birth rate, but
Yes.
does increase the fertilization and less the fear of TFF.
To TFF.
So I guess here it is just our fear of TFF, but
Yes.
the fertilization rate may be slightly high, but
the
there's
live
no
birth rate
improved
is
live birth rate.
yes.
Split ICSI is a split
Actually,
fertilization.
I want to add one point here, if I may.
Please,
if you see the trend towards using ICSI has gone up to 70-80% in all the places, everywhere, even in India. So, but did it improve the live birth rate?
No.
Did it improve the live birth rate in non-male factor? It didn't. We still at around 45-50%.
Yeah.
So using
like,
so much of ICSI, did it really actually make a difference? That is the question you need to ask yourself, I think. That little bit of fear of TFF, if we can,
Maybe, Sapna, I guess it makes a difference that yourself and Alex and Dr. Mangoli, you all started in an era probably when IVF was more there.
Yes.
You have that
We did
confidence.
70% IVF and 30% ICSI.
When I started, it was all ICSI. So
Correct.
it was like, we were trained more in ICSI than in IVF. So I guess it's that expertise and that confidence to do that IVF, I think, is also more.
Yes,
no?
and I think, Priya, the thing is, because we are having that medical background as clinicians also, because we study the case in totality. We know the history, we know what is happening, we know the DFI.
Even if I know, I do only ICSI. So I guess I'm biased because, see, what I know best, I do for the patient. It's,
Agreed.
That point, that plays a huge part.
Agree. But then, Priya, over time, you will understand when you see the embryos and you start comparing the embryos. I always have this thing towards IVF.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So the next question.
Yeah, the next question.
The couple, husband is 34 and the wife is 31 years, presents with a complaint of infertility with bilateral tubal block. They have a history of failed FERT in another IVF center when they had 11 oocytes, but none of them fertilized. But the mode of insemination or fertilization was not mentioned. They decided to go for another IVF in any of our centers. On the day of OPU, we have 12 oocytes, and the husband parameters is like 90 million with 45% total motility and 2 ml with 5% normal forms. So how do you want to, what do you think I should do? Like you tell me, Priya, you should go and do IVF, or please, Priya, go and do ICSI. Sir, Vijay sir.
Okay, yes.
Are you going to give me confidence to do IVF, or you're saying, please maintain the same Priya, you just do ICSI?
I'll tell you something. Because nowadays, it is very common that the patient now take a decision and they may switch over from one center to another center for various reasons. Now, it is patient's right to understand about the details of the procedure that they have understood. So, basically, what I will prefer is that try to communicate with that center, either through the patient or, if possible, directly to understand the mode of insemination, because it was not mentioned. You don't know about it. Why to unnecessarily repeat the things and make same mistakes again and again? Now, this is basically to understand. Nobody should feel offended, as this is the patient's decision. We have to respect it. Now, we should have that much of maturity nowadays and retrospectively analyze the reason why patient is going from one center to another center. But it is very important for us to understand the science behind this non-fertilization. Now, again, here, the couple is young. There is no information about the basic indication for IVF. The basic semen parameters are acceptable range. Now, also, though the wife is young, there is no information regarding the oocyte quality as such.
Yes.
That is another thing that you have to look at it. So I would like to go for the partial IVF ICSI if I don't have any other information in this manner. And the proportion depends upon available metaphase 2 oocytes, the healthiness of the oocyte, and basically the grade of and motility, because that plays a very crucial role. Though the count is 90 million, 100 million, it is important to see at that particular time when he gave the sample and after we process it, what is the grade? If the grade is still just motile or 1 to 2, then you may go for more ICSI and you may think of concentrated IVF. That is what you may think of if we have sufficient number of eggs available with us for such kind of experimentation. If still, in spite of the patient being young, if you have only 5 to 6 eggs available with you for any reason, then obviously ICSI is the option for that.
Sir, in this situation, I had contacted, given a hypothetical situation. The previous center we tried to contact, and they said they did ICSI, still they went for TFF. But then they said there was no much particular thing they could mention about the oocyte. How do you think we should go, sir? Do you still want us to do split, or just try ICSI and then activate the eggs?
Well, I will activation of the egg be done at this
because the previous centers they said we did ICSI, but they still had total fertilization failure. What do you think we should do, sir?
You have to do activation, Priya, because it is a previous ICSI failure. So this is a second cycle. So
we will not be able to do a split, no, sir. The split may not be advisable, no, sir.
We should be doing ICSI with calcium ionophore.
Yeah, then you can go for this thing. If you're sure about that, yeah, they did the properly. And
if they had done IVF and then they had failed with supposedly normal looking eggs, do you still think I should go for a split or complete ICSI, sir?
I will still suggest, considering all other indications and the age factors, still go for at least 30-70%. Because see, it is important for us to understand if the patient will come next time, whether it is possible to get normal fertilization or not. It is important for us to understand. So that is why if you get around 12 to 15 eggs, then at least 2 or 3 eggs you try to do normal.
Okay.
I think we should evaluate after we should do a partial denudation, evaluate the quality of eggs, and then decide, whether we have to go for all eggs or.
Yes, because see, one thing I've learned from there is it's a bilateral tubal block. So there is no chance of she's going to fertilize naturally. So doing IVF in the lab is not going to help her in the future. Then she's failed fertilization. See, that is the way I would look at it. Her tubes are blocked. By doing IVF, how am I going to help her in the future? By understanding fertilization of the. So I would do split, pure ICSI half, calcium ionophore ICSI half.
Okay.
Honestly, when I face such cases in my routine practice, I do take into account the center from which the patient is being referred, or he or she is coming.
Yes,
because many times
that is a very big thing. Very
also,
big thing.
Which who do not follow proper protocols, and then you can confidently, because oocyte activation is something which is the next zone,
Yes.
So before moving on to that,
Sarah, but when patients come to you on a second cycle having failed, it's also a question of cost. And we are doing a second cycle, adding calcium ionophore definitely can help her.
Maybe partially you can.
I would, in that case, I would do split because her tubes are blocked.
Keep them aloof, segregated nicely.
Because if her tubes were open, because if her tubes were open, my concept would be, I can do IVF, maybe it will help her in the future. I'll know about fertilization. But if her tubes are blocked, I don't want to know about her future. I have to help her in this cycle. And my aim in this cycle is not fail again. So I would do split, half ICSI and half calcium ionophore.
Alex, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do agree with what Vijay has mentioned. If you can get us some kind of information, then that is good. If you don't get any information, as what she has mentioned, maybe we should go for the calcium activation to save that patient.
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Yes, because cost is important, Alex, no?
Yeah.
For us, ultimately, that is what plays a very big role for our decision making.
And also there is some kind of a situation, so like maybe we can say there is some kind of a iatrogenic kind of a lab-based fertilization failures.
Yes,
we can't, because it is not only the sperm related or the oocyte related, the technician related, iatrogenic kind of thing. That is, there is no way to find out that. It's no way to find out.
Yes.
You can ask the patient, the results for patients being done in similar time frame, so that might be of some help.
Yeah, and I think stimulation
if
also.
Batch and the whole batch is failing, then it might be a technical reason only.
Yes. Also, the stimulation plays a big role. I think we are seeing a lot of older women. We're seeing a lot of poor responders. Poseidon 1, 2, 3, 4. 40% of our practice is Poseidon.
Yeah,
isn't it?
True.
So stimulation plays such a big role. If you use LH in the beginning, the oocyte is better. You use LH, you don't use LH and you use only FSH. Things are going to be different. So Poseidon 1 and 2 lead LH. And then you need higher stimulations in 3 and 4. So that also makes a big difference, no, Priya? I think
Yeah,
that also
LH
plays
is
a
quite
big-
controversial. We will leave it to that.
We'll leave it at that, yes.
What a domain, at least today.
Yeah, so I guess what the major thing is to know there are three arms in ICSI. One is the oocyte, the other is the sperm. The third important arm is the technician. Like, you know, if somebody doesn't have the expertise or has some issues on that particular day, then also can be a cause for poor FERT or fertilization failures as well.
Right.
So I think the consensus is to go for a split ICSI in such cases, or if the patient is being referred from a good center, then you can seriously think of artificial
activation for half the eggs.
Yeah. Okay, we move on to the next question then. Okay, before that, anybody experience with Dr. Mangoli? You must have been having good experience with rescue ICSI. You might have done it a lot many times. Any success or any serious success with it? Anecdotal.
Yeah, rescue ICSI is not the thing that is obviously recommended, because I have seen that you may get fertilization, but the subsequent embryonic growth is not as it's even I would say around less than 5% of the embryos which are fertilized through rescue ICSI, you may get good quality embryo, or I'll say the implantable embryo. So I really don't recommend.
No point in freezing them and trying to synchronize them in the next cycle with the endometrium. I mean, if it's a slow embryo, like freeze it and
Right.
Sir, but you're talking about the regular conventional or insemination or the short insemination, sir?
No,
Even in short insemination, the results aren't good, sir, after rescue ICSI?
Early rescue ICSI.
Yes. Even the short insemination, they are good, but the subsequent embryonic.
Oh, okay.
So, Dr. Sapna, do you have any experience with the early?
We used to do rescue ICSI before, Sarath. I've never been happy with it. And because we do more of split, we never really face this kind of a total fertilization, very rare, unless it's a very, bad oocyte quality, very poor oocyte quality. That is when we face these problems. We always try to wait, we've never reached, I think we've learned our lessons hard very early, because for people like us who used to do a lot of IVF, and I used to do high insemination concentrations also. I used to, bring down the pellet to the basic and increase the concentration, and then do high insemination concentration, 800,000 per ml, 20,000 sperm per 25 microliter. That is how I used to do it before. That is when the fertilization rates were very good, like 50, 60%, in spite of low counts. I used to raise my concentration. So high insemination worked well for us. And now because of ICSI, Sarah, we don't really face this thing because we are splitting. We're not doing IVF unless it's, secondary. So I somehow was never happy with rescue ICSI, Sarah.
Yeah.
Would you prefer a short incubation or a long incubation with high insemination?
In my lab, only short. We don't do long incubation.
Right from
only
beginning,
short.
you're doing short.
From the beginning. Because I was James Catt was the one who trained me in short, and I really liked his approach.
Dr. Alex actually taught me. Alex taught me the short insemination.
Right.
Dr. Alex,
because the
would you like to
embryos were
comment?
so better, so much more better. I think the Ross and all that those dead sperms generated. My God, once we get used to short, you cannot go back to that long incubation.
I heard somebody talking about the high fertilization rate in the Chinese IVF clinic. And the reason they're telling that even though they do a lot of IVF, they do short incubation.
With high
and by the after 5 hours, after 5 hours, they remove the cumulus corona. And if they don't find the second polar body, they go ahead with the rescue ICSI. Right. And the study shows that a similar kind of pregnancy outcome. So that's why they are pregnancy, their fertilization rate is very high. Yeah.
Dr. Suresh Katera, he is published on.
He's
the first paper. Yeah.
He's on the first proposed that paper.
He's the one who started it, right?
Yeah. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. But the thing is that the timing, how much time you should incubate. There are some studies by Bangam, I think, Mona Bangam. Even they say that it takes only 30 seconds. They did a split study, and they incubated 30 seconds and removed the sperm. Another sibling who said they removed after 90 minutes, 1.5 hours.
They
And they
probably
found the
use
same
high lace then.
fertilization. No, they didn't use anything.
But it's so difficult to remove the cumulus cells even after 2 hours.
No, actually, maybe I'm not
They
talking about the
probably did
cumulus
highlights.
removal. No,
Yeah.
after that, the removal from this sperm drop.
They
Then
remove
we
the eggs
put
from the
it,
sperm
yeah.
drop and put the
And
Yeah,
sperm
leave it
drop.
in the
they put
fresh
it next.
media.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That
So that
is,
by the time
yeah.
most of the cumulus get removed.
Right, got it.
I can tell you my experience, because when we used to get in the initial phase excellent grade of motility and good quality eggs, expanded. At that time, we never used to separate the cumulus completely because there was no ICSI at that time. But a fully expanded and sparsely separated cumulus, nicely separated cumulus, if we used to get that one. When this study was started in maybe around 1809 or 90, at that time we did small studies. And the best results what we get is 15 minutes, 5 minutes exposure of grade 3 to 4, maximum 4 grade. If you expose it, 15 minutes is more than enough for you to get the fertilization.
Yeah.
Believe me, initially we were so scared because we were before that we were used to expose overnight. We used to just keep it into the incubator, put the around 5 to 10,000 sperms per egg, and then into the centerware dish, and then overnight. And when I went to Europe to see other labs, and when this kind of study they were doing of 1 hour exposure and less one, I was really surprised. But believe me, this is the experience that even 15 minutes is more than enough.
Yeah, I keep it only for 1 hour, Vijay.
And sir,
More than
how do you
enough.
prepare the sperm? I mean, do you hyperactivate the sperm? 15 minutes exposure seems too low.
It's too less. I keep it for 1 hour because otherwise the cumulus doesn't digest and you kind of have difficulty in taking out the egg.
I
1
think
hour
the
is
important,
good.
yeah, I think the important point is that you should use
not
the
damage the egg.
proper fertilization media to
Yes.
capacitate the sperm.
Correct.
Now the problem is that with all these single step media, which is
Yes.
having a pH of around 7.25 to 7.3, I'm not sure whether that is enough to hyperactivate and capacitate the sperms.
Yeah. So I do only in sequential if I do IVF.
Yeah.
I never do in single step.
That's very important.
So that is an important point we are getting from you, Sapna, that if you're doing IVF, you go only for sequential.
Only. I'll put it in FERT media only and then move it to cleave. I'll strip it after 1 hour and leave it in cleave.
Move it to cleave.
Yes.
Okay, so that is another important point. So I think we've got lots of takeaway from the discussion now that even if you split, a short incubation is what is required, but the 15 minutes makes sense, sir, because as we know, the sperms once deposited in the vagina in nature, you can see the sperms in less than half an hour in the fallopian tube.
Yes.
So I guess when it can travel so many centimeters in half an hour, it should be able to stick to the egg, which is like 5 millimeters away from the.
Yeah, that depends on the optimization of culture media also.
Also, yes.
That is there.
That is natural, So
yeah,
15 minutes I think is too less. Yeah, we shouldn't be giving that takeaway because the cumulus requires to be digested.
But I guess it's just that short incubation is what is required. But when you're doing it, we should do only with the sequential, and the fertilization media should be there.
That's better.
Capacitate the sperms well. And that's a great point we've got.
One more point, the timing of insemination. Because with the controlled ovarian stimulation, the synchrony may not be similar between the aspirated oocyte. So it needs some time for the cytoplasmic maturation. So maybe 2, 3, or 4
2 hours.
hours.
Depending. So depending. 36 plus 2 hours, Sapna?
Yes.
Okay.
We take 2 samples, Priya. We take 1 hour apart. So we don't use the first sample. Unless the second sample doesn't come, we don't use the first sample.
So when is the first sample collected? After OP?
After OP. First sample comes in. Unless he has a collection problem.
For all the
1 hour
patients, you're
later,
taking 2
second sample
samples.
comes in. Second sample is used for insemination. That's
Sapna,
why it takes about 2 hours. Sorry.
As a routine, you take 2 samples for all.
Everybody who walks into the institute, whether it is IUI or IVF or ICSI, gives 2 samples.
And if they refuse to give, you just kick them out.
They are so motivated, they give it for counseling.
Moving on to the third question now. On the day of OPU, the husband provides a semen sample with concentration of 5 million per ml. volume is 3 ml, normal morphology 3%, and motility type A and B 25%. 20 plus 5, Dr. Vijay, it's 20 plus 5, A and B. So now the husband is a Google freak and he has read a lot about, IVF.
Bad things of ICSI.
Yeah.
The bad
So
things about ICSI.
he comes to you and tells that I want IVF only.
Yeah.
So how are you going to approach this case? Dr. Devin, how will you approach this case?
Dr. Devan is on our side. He's all ICSI.
He'll turn down this patient probably.
No. So
He's
yeah,
a new age practitioner, all ICSI.
correct. So yeah, we do have some cases where patient, as you told, like Google patient, where they will come and they will ask only for IVF. So definitely we will assess the post-wash
In this
motility.
patient, how will you do IVF?
Yeah, so obviously we will assess the post-wash count and motility. So if there is progressive motility, maybe that is fine. That means the
Post-wash count is 3 million.
No, but motility. So progressive motile sperms, the numbers are higher side. So obviously, maybe I will go ahead with IVF. But if it is not there, maybe I will again try to talk to consultant that we need to counsel the patient and we need to explain that this is like a difficult scenario. So it depends on the progressive motile sperms, like number of progressive motile sperm. But anyway, if the patient's wish is there, definitely we would go ahead with IVF.
Can I answer
Sapna,
that?
how would a high concentration IVF here?
Correct. So first thing I would do is bring down the drop size, Priya, the culture drop size.
What is the drop size?
The culture in which the oocytes are placed. So I'll make another dish. I'll make another dish with very small drops, 10 microliter.
What is the size of the drop?
10 microliter. Normally I culture in 50 microliters, 25 or 50. But here I'll bring down the drop size to 10 microliters. As I said, it's already 3 million there. So 3 million, I calculate in 10 microliters how much I need. And I'll put 20,000 sperm per oocyte. And I will not maybe do a short incubation for only 2 hours. I'll probably wait for 4 hours.
Okay.
You won't wait overnight in such cases also.
We can also. So what I do is when I take out the dish and I don't see digestion, and I see the cumulus just bare like how it is when we pick it up. I don't see it darkening. When I don't see it darkening, I'll keep it back and come back next day and do it.
It's not stuck to the plate and...
Yes, it's better to leave it that way.
And extend the culture.
Yeah, especially in this case because husband is not getting convinced. I mean, very rare these scenarios, but I would definitely say I look at it after 4 hours. If the cumulus is not digested, I'll keep it back in the incubator, come back next day and take it out. I'll have better fertilization because she has only 6 eggs.
But you do get such patients. We had a Indigo CEO coming to us, and we froze his sample, and he personally came all the way to see that his sample is being discarded.
Wow.
Was it for anybody else? Obviously,
actually, we had a patient recently, Sarah. The sister-in-law, the mother-in-law, the father-in-law wanted to see the cryo sample. So we brought her into the cryo room. We took out the sample. She checked the name. She checked her records. She took photographs of that. And then what I did, I said, because I had 3 vials, and I took out the 1 vial, the other vial I gave it to her and said, go do a DNA finger. There are some patients who they really push you to the wall in spite of what all you do. So I think that's the way to be open and show them. She took photographs of the entire thing, how we recorded it, how the vial was done, how the double signature was put, how the records were, everything she insisted that she wanted.
Right. Dr.
So I can understand what you went through.
Yeah, quite common, especially in this, you're living in Hyderabad, I'm living in Gurgaon.
Lot of techies.
IT people, they read Google all night.
And I think it's okay. I mean, it's okay.
Yeah, it's
when
okay.
It's their mindset. So we just give it
doesn't
some
make
time.
any difference to us,
So. Exactly. When you're doing the good job, might as well just openly say, okay, take it.
We have to be a little bit more careful about it, and obviously we are doing the right thing. So there's nothing wrong in showing it to them.
Right.
It's right. Yeah.
As far as this case is concerned, certainly what I personally think is first try to counsel the patient. See, when he had Googled it, he must have some kind of limited knowledge based on which he has taken the decision that IVF is good for him. So it is as a clinicians, as an embryologist, it is our duty to explain it to him the ground facts of it. Try to counsel the patient about the possibility of the IVF output in such scenarios and advantages of ICSI in this scenario. Is it possible if it is a possible commercial burden, that is the reason why they are saying that no, XC costs more or something like that, then we have to explain it to them that suppose if there is no fertilization and you have to undergo second IVF cycle, then what is the cost involved into that one? So there is a straight comparison between the two.
Right.
If some patient insists on IVF, then
I agree with you, sir. But at the same time, with this counts and motility, I think IVF is definitely on. So there is no point in dissuading him that counseling him on the other side. I think IVF will work. I have also done IVF.
Yes.
Dentists
Yes.
they don't have an XC machine, so I go and do IVF there.
Yeah, this
give that samples.
It works.
Moderate oligoestenoid.
Yeah,
It works quite well actually. In
yes,
such cases.
60%.
And Dr. Sapna was mentioning about high dose insemination.
Correct.
High concentration. I think absolutely.
And also, Sarah, dropping the size of the drop. Bringing down the size of the drop, it helps.
So in this article, what they've done is they have used a high insemination concentration of 80,000 per ml.
That's what I do.
A drop size of 25 microliters.
Right.
Not 10, 25.
Right.
So it comes to around multiplied by 40, and then it comes to around.
Yeah, you do that calculation on your insemination tip and you adjust that.
So it comes to around 44 lakh sperm per ml, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
See to it that you have maximum motile sperms where you inseminate, otherwise you're going to increase the ROS factor.
Correct.
Yeah, and the idea of increasing the volume of the drop, I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah,
even if the count is low, you can achieve per ml.
You'll double it.
Enhance the sperm concentration by dropping,
double it.
cutting down on the drop size.
Right.
We have already discussed that short incubation is preferred even in such cases. So over to you, Dr. Priya.
A couple, 40 years, the husband age is 40 and the wife's age is 39, has been married for 9 years and is a case of primary infertility. The husband's semen parameters is as follows. Concentration is 50 million per ml. Motility type A is 30%, B is 10%. The wife's AMH is 0.3. The husband has to travel and will not be able to be available on the day of OPU, and 3 vials are frozen. On the day of OPU, we have 3 oocytes retrieved after thawing and washing. The post-motile count is 10 million. So in this scenario, we have a woman of advanced maternal age with a low oocyte yield and a frozen thawed sperm with a 10 million count. What is the choice of method of insemination in this patient? Alex, do you want to start?
Yeah, even the same thing is being mentioned by this SRM practice committee this time. And the low number of oocytes or a high age group doesn't insist you to do the ICSI for these patients, because the live birth is same with the conventional IVF versus the ICSI. So you can go ahead with the conventional IVF for this patient.
Are the chances of total fertilization failure more in low oocyte yield?
Priya, she's 10 years married, right? How many years married? Yeah.
10 years.
She's 9 years married and her counts are good. I would go for ICSI.
I will also go
She
for
has
it.
only 3 oocytes and she's come in after 9 years. I would say, forget ASRM. I have to face her. I do ICSI.
We have to face the patient.
I have to face her. Next day. The sad part in the clinic, Priya, whatever happens in the lab, you have to go and tell the patient.
Yeah,
you become responsible. You have to do the right decision. And I think that is when...
And Priya, you mentioned 3 oocytes, but are all these mature oocytes?
Yeah. I would go for ICSI.
Then only ICSI is possible if you go on evaluating the maturity.
Right.
But Alex, I just wanted to know, in this, just to have a little bit more discussion, isn't the total fertilization failure more common in the low oocyte yield group of patients?
It is. It may not be related to the sperm factor or something like that. It may be the degeneration or some other issues. Maybe the maturation.
She's 40 years old, so
aneuploid.
And also
factor could be also lead to fertilization
and
failure.
Also you can see higher rate of degeneration in ICSI when there is a very low numbers of the oocytes you get. So the decision I know that the decision, especially what has been mentioned is that if the patient is having it for 10 years, ICSI may be a good choice.
Better, Alex. Yeah.
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 But she may
look
have
at that point.
fertilization failure or degen both with IVF or ICSI in this case, because she is 40 with a low oocyte yield.
Yes.
The eggs could degenerate with our ICSI. She may have less fertilization with ICSI, and she may have fertilization failure with IVF as well. We may never be able to.
It is better to play safe. Yeah, because tomorrow when you ask, better to play safe.
We did the add-on for you, but still we were not able to get a good outcome.
Yeah, exactly. That
we can say we did the best. You know?
Yeah, exactly. That's
because if you do IVF and she fails, because if you do IVF and she fails, and she'll come and ask you, why the hell did you not do ICSI?
Why did you do an ICSI?
Yeah. Exactly.
So as per ASRM, we're not doing the best actually. So we should go with IVF. We can go with IVF also, but yes, technically and practically speaking, I mean,
actually, so many of the recent papers, they have said that even in low oocyte yield, if you do IVF, your quality of embryos is much better, and you could have a better pregnancy rates.
There is a paper where they have compared only one oocyte.
Yeah.
Single oocyte, IVF and ICSI. Single oocyte, RCT is there.
The results are comparable.
And they are saying comparable.
But then we have
they compare the live birth rate.
Of not
but then
not
see,
IVF.
but then see the total fertilization failure, they are not taking into account. They are only looking at the live birth rate.
I know.
Ultimately, you and I will be facing the TFFs, right?
Exactly.
I think that is very valid point.
It does not, what we are doing may not be. Yes, Alex?
I think that is very valid point. There is the teamwork is very important. Like if the decision is made by the embryology team, and if it doesn't work out well, then the onus is on the embryology team.
Yes.
So there should be a discussion before, maybe in those kind of clinics where there is a kind of this kind of situation happens when there is a difficult cases.
Right.
Then that is a way forward in those kind of clinics.
Right. Absolutely. The way we do it is that, so the clinician first sees, puts down her thoughts, then it has to come to the embryologist. I go and have to talk to the patient. I put down my points, and then together we take a decision. That's why splitting, calcium ionophore, what do we do? Shall we do IVF ICSI? Shall we do one egg IVF? All these things come into play.
I feel that when you denude for ICSI, you do come to know the oocyte quality. I mean, even if there's nothing mature and you go do an IVF and wait for 1 day to fertilize,
right?
You know, prolongs the anxiety of the clinician.
The patient also.
The patient,
yes.
Priya, I think I can add something to this one.
Yes, sir.
I asked about the maturity and the egg qualities, because egg quality and particularly the structure, membrane structure, plays an extremely important role, particularly for the aged patient, poor responders, and the mode of insemination. I'll tell you, I remember one case distinctly, because the same 42, 43 years old patient, only 4 eggs were obtained. And based on the similar circumstances, slightly the sperm count was a little better. We were around 5 to 6 million or so. So we obviously decided to go for the ICSI. We denuded it. And the moment we started doing the ICSI, what we could observe is the first egg, through the zona, there was absolutely, it went smooth. And when we tried to penetrate the ulema, there was absolutely no flexibility to the ulema. The needle entered inside like it is the knife going into the butter. And we could see that once you come out, the needle is taken out, the ooplasm started oozing out. You know, that makes a lot of difference. So you came to know. Now thinking that this may be the only oocyte, when we went to the next oocyte, the same thing happened. And then I have decided nothing doing, I'm not going to degenerate or destroy for the next 2 oocytes. So we did the concentrated insemination, and both the eggs got fertilized the next day. So the thing is that
This is something, sir, I can recall.
Take decisions based on each and every step.
Every step of the way.
Partial denudation is, I think, the norm of the day.
The way to go. Yeah.
And I was visiting a center whom they actually called me to do ICSI. And when I did ICSI, I found there was a high degree of degeneration rate. So actually, I had to resort to IVF, split IVF ICSI, and ultimately to more or less IVF, in such a center. I don't know. There's something wrong with the stimulation, because they used to, kind of order the donors from another city or another state. And probably, you know, they used to play with the injectables, and the oocyte quality was, elasticity was never to my liking. So as soon as I did ICSI, it degenerated. So I had to go back to IVF in third center, you know. So this is something which I think
that's what I said, Sarab. The stimulation plays a very big role.
Yeah,
also in our decision making,
exactly.
And that is why when you stabilize with the clinician and your decision, you get into that path where you see very less of TFF.
So the protocol we designed for them, for their patients who were like from the same city, and she used to monitor it and, you know, stimulate on her own. We used to go for IVF ICSI both, and for all the donors which she used to recruit from another city, we used to go for more or less ICSI, IVF. Sorry.
Right. I remember one case, Sarah. This patient came from Mumbai or Delhi, I don't remember. She had 5 ICSI failures. Good count, good motility, borderline, not good, borderline. 5 ICSI failures. And in that case, when I looked at everything looked okay. She was 32 and she had, I think, 6 or 7 oocytes. And I just told myself that day, I said, you know what, she did 5 ICSIs and all of them, they had day 2 transfer, they had day 4 transfer, they had day 5 blastocyst transfer, she had FET, everything. I said, no, let's do IVF. Maybe there is some kind of aneuploidy, something in this sperm that is not really, you know, that we are picking up. Maybe the number of these aneuploid sperms or whatever it is are higher, you know, mitochondrial problems or whatever. Let's do IVF and see what happens. So I talked to the patient. I said, I do only 1 egg ICSI. And the remaining, whatever you have, I'll do IVF. Let's see. You won't believe she had 1 baby in the fresh transfer. She came back for a second child, and came back for a second FET, and she conceived. She had 2 children out of that IVF cycle. And she failed 5 ICSIs previously.
Similar
so
case,
you
I
never
can
know
recall.
whether the sperm is, you know, doing
Maybe
the job better than
not
you.
the right thing. Nature knows better. Yeah.
Right. Nature
Similar
maybe
case,
is better in some cases like this.
Yeah.
Similar case I can recall from another center in New Delhi itself. So they did everything, you know, ovarian drilling, everything, 5 cycles of ICSI. They used donor, surrogate, everything they tried for her. And when she came to us, then the guy told me that there is something wrong with my sperm. So we, you know, kind of evaluated his sperm. It was absolutely normal. And she conceived twice in the first and the second IUI cycle. Now she has got 2 kids. The couple lives abroad.
Simple IUI.
So simple IUI that she conceived. I mean,
right.
I don't
You
know
said
what
she's a
people
PCO,
do. I mean,
right?
yeah, she's a PCO. She's anovulatory and nothing.
Right.
I mean, just induce ovulation and she conceived.
Sometimes, Sarah, PCOs do so badly during IVF stimulation. They do so badly because the zona, the ulema, and everything. And I think it's the most important thing is the cytoplasmic maturity, the timing of the trigger. You trigger them early. You have immature cytoplasm. Whether you do ICSI, whether you do IVF, the embryos are terrible.
I agree.
The triggering is the most important thing for the PCO. So probably you waited with clomiphene or whatever a little later, you know, you must have waited till 20 mm or 22, and you must have triggered her later, and that must have done the trick for you.
Yes.
I think we have talked something about the IVF with frozen thaw as well.
So,
can we go to the next subheading, Sarah?
Yeah. So I think we can leave out this question because it will be too technical and I mean.
You're shooting over the time. Yeah.
Yeah, we are over the time.
So come and stop us now.
Ved is going to, you know, kick me. So the second last question.
We have extra buffer time for 30 minutes, so you can go ahead.
Ved sir is listening. Ved sir is alert and listening.
Actually, I am also excited to listen these good things. We are learning.
Thanks to you, we are here.
A couple with a history of early abortions approaches you for a cycle of IVF ICSI. Husband's profile is semen concentration 7 million per ml. Motility is 20%, volume 1 ml. Morphology 1% normal forms. The couple is concerned that the use of ICSI might increase the likelihood of abortions, congenital malformations. Since they have a history and they are again Google doctors, you know, so they are very concerned. So now, what investigation would you order before going ahead with this case? I mean,
first of all,
surprised that they had the RPL with 7 million count.
I know that was the first thing I thought of.
Just one abortion.
First thing that comes, 7 million, they had RPL. Wow.
Just one. It was a IVF ICSI case maybe. And
so it's a low count with good fertility, but let's
What's
look at
the
the
first thing?
DFI.
I think I want a karyotype.
Yeah, karyotype maybe. Then DFI. I think DFI would definitely benefit this patient because 7 million is the count. It's an OTA. So it had already led in one abortion. If the female is absolutely normal, I would definitely look at the DFI for the male. And what was the question? How would you investigate? How would you counsel?
The
They
question
want
is that
ICSI. They want
They
IVF or they
are,
want ICSI?
they are, that person is
they
worried
don't want
about
anything.
ICSI. So
He's
just,
worried about the side effects of ICSI, you can say.
Right. So I think that if you look at the side effects, ICSI compared to IVF safety, we know
Safety.
that safety. Yeah, we can talk about comparable results, and we can also talk that ICSI has. Of course, there is not so much of. There's quite a lot of data coming in that ICSI is pretty safe, and that the congenital, and it is a 7 million count. It's not like really bad OTA, right? So in cryptospermia or necrospermia, you're worried about those kind of congenital aberrations and things like that, and developmental problems in the baby and imprinting. But this is 7 million. So you can try to convince him that, you conceive naturally. There's a fair chance of just about a 3-4% chance of congenital anomalies, like equal to the population. And I don't think you need to worry. I think counseling will help this couple.
so Alex, what all would you counsel when you're counseling for such a patient with RPL in terms of ICSI, the safety or the risk of ICSI?
Yeah, the patient here is really concerned about the outcome, maybe the ICSI. So definitely, maybe if the count is less than 10 million, maybe you can order for the Y chromosome microdeletion. So that way you can, even though you can't do much thing because it is transmittable by the ICSI to the next generation. But at least you can, if you can rule out if it is not there to the patient, you can convince that way. And second, if you have the facility, maybe you can even order for the PGT for this particular patient. Yeah.
So like Priya
It's a
said, I
valid
think
point. I
karyotype
think
is a must.
karyotype and Y chromosome microdeletions, because they're again going to be transmitted. Otherwise, IVF and ICSI, they've got comparable safety profile.
Yes.
ICSI has a little more.
Slightly higher, according to some studies, 8%.
And this kind of patients are really needs the genetic counseling,
Yes.
the proper genetic counseling
Yes.
throughout
PGT,
their
I
cycle.
think, Alex, PGT is the one for this couple.
Because in ICSI, you are covering all the male factor also. Right. So things do get transmitted,
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Devan, in NOVA, when you are counseling your patients for ICSI, what are all the risks that you tell about ICSI to your patients? How do you, the risk and the outcomes, what are the negative things that you actually say? Do you say or you don't say?
See, in NOVA, actually, embryologists are not meeting the patients. That is the first thing. So it is the consultants who are directly in touch with the patients.
Whichever, in your consent form, you might be mentioning. What all do you mention? How do you counsel your patients?
Yeah, so there are patients who would like to meet embryologist, and they will come up like, okay, can you please explain what is IVF or what are the advantages of IVF or ICSI? But again, there are very few cases. And again, based on the history, maybe we would like to explain them the advantages of ICSI and IVF. But as I had already explained, like we prefer more of ICSI rather than IVF mainly because of the reasons like if it is secondary infertility, yes, I would prefer IVF. But other than that, I would be really cautious of counseling for IVF. Rather, we would prefer more ICSI.
Okay, now when you're counseling for ICSI, what are all the risks of ICSI that you do mention to your patients? Sir, Vijay sir, do you want to explain how to do that to our patients?
Well, in this case, I will say that the abortion does not necessarily be due to male factor only as such, but it can be. Means we have not yet finalized that this is because of that, unless and until we go into the detailed part. The patient is so concerned, and if it is affordable, genetic reason can be analyzed from the abortus when it got aborted. What was the reason for that abortion, and if chromosomal abnormalities in this case. As far as the DFI is concerned, why I would like to ask even Dr. Sapna, because you have done a lot of work into this one.
Yes.
Although the DNA fragmentation may be suggested, because I'm not very much convinced about this one. The simple reason is knowing the percentage of DNA fragmentation or fragmented sperms from a population in a stained manner. it does not enable us to select the non-fragmented from the for the insemination.
So basically, Vijay, I don't think we are actually looking at picking up the sperm with the DFI, which is normal. No. It's more about the pre-IVF workup that we are working on. The workup is that if your DFI is more than 35-40, then you want to evaluate, let's look for a varicocele, let's look for infections, let's look for diabetes, let's look, asking to lose weight or whatever interventions that can be done. Let's add antioxidants and let's try to bring down the DFI before we actually get into these. It's about the workup. On that day, maybe I'll add microfluidics. Maybe I'll use Zymot for this particular case. I'll write there Zymot. Maybe we won't centrifuge this sample. Those kind of things, interventions can be done. But actually on the table, when you're picking up the sperm, all of us know you can't do anything. So the pre-IVF workup is what is important, to try to bring down the cause. Because yes, I'm telling you, people have failed, had abortions, come to us, we've done DFI, we've seen 50% damage, 65% damage. And then when we do all the workup and everything, it comes down to about 20 points. After varicocele, it doesn't really change much. It drops by about 10 units max by the microligation. I've seen, like, after that 6 weeks and 3 months apart, I've seen just about a 10% variation. But then we go into the testis. If it's a second, third cycle, I definitely like to go into the testis and take testicular sperm. So, I'll do half testis and half this. So interventions can change, management can change. Yeah, I can't pick up the sperm, but I can at least work up in a better way.
But the thing is that patient is more interested. For example, if I tell patient that 80% of your sperms, I cannot use it, I'm sorry. But then the patient will say to us, I don't care about that. Since 20% sperms are there, which you can use it.
No, that's not the way we counsel, no, Vijay. We say the DNA fragmentation, which should be around 25% at the max, is 80%. The chances are this abortion could be because of this. Let's work on this. That's the way you counsel. You don't say 20% is normal, 80% is abnormal.
Correct. So,
is testicular sperm affected by varicocele? Do we need to do a varicocelectomy to increase to decrease the DFI of testicular sperm? Is it affected in varicocele cases?
So the workup starts with the DFI, and if it is high, it goes to the urologist. If the urologist sees a clinical varicocele, he will ligate. If he sees no clinical varicocele, he will not ligate, send it back, and then I'll go for testicular. So that is how we work, Sarab. It's not that I will do a ligation and go for testicular. If there is a varicocele, yes, I will ligate.
Okay, that's your protocol. But otherwise, even if it's a subclinical varicocele, then maybe you can directly go for a testicular sperm.
Right, subclinical we don't ligate, no, Sarab. It's not recommended only, no. Only clinical, grade 3 onwards we ligate.
Yeah.
Is the decision based on the DFI or only on?
For anything beyond 50, I take a decision based on DFI, Sarab.
50.
45-50 is my cutoff, yeah.
But testicular sperm in general is not affected by varicocele. Or is it affected?
I think whenever there is a varicocele, there is going to be a toxic load on the testis. There is going to be disrupted spermatogenesis. So whether it is ejaculated or testicular, I'm sure it will be affected.
But anyways, you're using the shot, you're having the second sample used. So that means you're getting a newer sample, right?
Anybody who's coming in will give a second sample.
Yeah, so that means you're getting the newer samples, there.
Yes.
So it is
but
not
then for
stayed
50,
there for quite some time.
Priya, we did first sample and second sample, DFI studies. We did it with Tara.
Okay.
We did 10 samples and we saw. Definitely there is a difference. So that is why for us as a protocol, I think it's recommended also.
There is a
Let us do what we can do when patient is spending 2 lakhs, 1 lakh, whatever it is. I think taking a second sample, it helps.
Absolutely.
Not at all.
Many times I've seen the
income. No money is involved here.
Yeah, and many times the count and motility also improve in
far better
in a second sample with short
with
a healthier DFI also.
Yes, I've seen that too.
I also completely agree with that. The second sample always, although you may get slightly less count, but still the quality wise, I'm convinced
much better. Yeah.
Right.
So this is a Chinese study which says that the safety profile of IVF versus ICSI is comparable, and so that concern of ICSI not being safe is no longer there.
I think, Sarab, now we should take Netherlands, not China.
We can, I think we can trust Chinese, at least as far as we need to keep the IVF industry going. Because once somebody buys an ICSI machine, so he wants to use it.
Yeah, correct.
When you bought a BMW, you want to drive it and show it to the world.
Correct.
ICSI karo.
ICSI karo.
So Priya, the last question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here, the clinician at a 3-year-old IVF center, they are concerned regarding the occasional use of ICSI at their center. They feel that the embryologist is not competent to do ICSI and therefore prefers to do IVF in most patients. They feel that their ICSI should be used to improve their results. And one of you, why should I take the burden of audit? So
Sarab is taking the burden now.
One of you take the burden of visiting the center to audit the results. The embryologist admits to using ICSI as an add-on procedure only when it is indicated. The KPIs are within normal limits for IVF, whereas higher degeneration of oocytes is seen in ICSI cases. What would be our advice to the center, and what would be the advice to the technician, the embryologist as well? Alex, do you want to start? And
that's one of the big issue. Even if we say that this is the things that you see in some of the centers in India, like some of the embryologists, they are comfortable with the IVF systems. Maybe they are not trained that much in a competent way in ICSI. And also we have a huge kind of a donation happens. And some of the people are very good counselors also to do the donation to such patients. Maybe I should say like eugenic experts telling the patient about the negative aspects of the ICSI. So I think this kind of a centers, maybe that person, I think they need a retraining. I think that's very important. That aspect need to be taken care of. Because the IVF, it's okay to do, but the more and more we are seeing a male infertility across the cities. So I think the residential embryologist should be really competent in that thing, especially with the new guidelines coming. So you should have the in-house persons.
What is it the advice that you would give to the clinician who's set up the embryology lab or the IVF center based on the IVF results? Because the IVF result seems to be good for the embryologist, but they are insisting that we should go ahead and do more ICSI. Probably that we must have to explain to them that the embryologist is doing well with IVF. Probably they should be allowed to do so, right?
Yeah, that is the thing. And also maybe the degeneration happens due to multiple reasons. So the way they handle the gamete, how they denude it, the timing, what type of ICSI needles they use, and also the ICSI rig temperature. So many things.
High days concentration.
The high days. Yeah. And all these things matters. I think that's very important.
It's not just the technique, but maybe the stage temperature.
Yeah.
That also plays a very big role. Yeah.
Then we need to underplay, we need to counsel the clinicians that, doing ICSI, IVF is fine. Only if he's doing it for selected cases, he is doing the right thing.
I would say that, call another embryologist and let him do only the ICSI, and then let's compare the degeneration. And then maybe, as this embryologist is watching, he will pick up and learn, and that is how they will step up the ICSI.
Yeah, that is one of the good way.
That's a good way.
I think I will also suggest the same thing, that it is not important that whether you have the ICSI machine or you don't have it.
Right.
The moment you declare that you are offering ICSI, then you should have competent embryologists to do it. And there are certain situations, certain indications where ICSI is unavoidable. Then what in that case, that is important.
Exactly. Azoospermia.
Good count and everything, the IVF works better, it's absolutely fine. But when you need it, at that time you should be able to offer it. So my point will also be that in these circumstances, call an experienced embryologist to perform the ICSI
procedure and then continue like this till this person picks up.
and simultaneously train someone.
Right.
That is most important thing. If you don't want to depend upon some outsiders for many reasons, from the time point of view, from the convenience point of view, the best way is to train someone and get.
$1 million question, sir. That thing your post is like $1 million queue, sir. But I think now for any embryologist, basic thing of culture system, IVF and ICSI, along with the cryopreservation technique are the basic things for any embryologist, I suppose. Now, I don't think we can have somebody who is exclusive of ICSI right now, I guess. So that's become part and parcel of our basics rather than add-ons right now.
Right.
So I agree, but then we do have people, going in for doing ICSIs and all, and IVF is being managed by the basic staff. So IVF is considered an easy technique, which actually it is not.
Actually not.
IVF is not
Actually
easy.
not.
Dr. Sapna, and she has so many,
I've done so many, so I know.
modifications of IVF, then
it's not. Everything in culture is not easy.
Yeah.
After hearing Jason Swain today, even now I learned something. I don't think we can stop learning.
Absolutely.
Completely agree with you. So, Dr. Priya, why don't you sum up the session with them?
So I guess, what ASRM says is like ICSI does not seem to have an added advantage in a lot of situations, such as unexplained fertility, non-male infertility, or in low oocyte yield in all these places. And the absolute indications seem to be only in male factor infertility when it is for PGT. For IVN, then we want to fertilize eggs post IVN, or ICSI is definitely recommended for cryopreserved frozen oocytes. But however, in other things, they are not conclusive about it. They've never said that ICSI would probably give a better result. Yes, they say that the fertilization rate is better, but the live birth rate never seems to coincide with the higher fertilization rates. However, said and done, I think in a practical aspect, I think practicality in us working in the setup and having to be answerable to the patients, when we take the ASRM, I mean, that's not the end. I think data is an evolving process. It is not stopping today. We might change the data in 5 years. By that time, we might have lost some patients as well, in the sense patients might have lost their opportunity to get pregnant. So I guess the valid points have been shared in this forum today in terms of whenever there is even an iota of doubt in terms of whether this patient only IVF is the right way to go. As all our panelists, the senior panelists have definitely said, please go for a split ICSI, like go for IVF and some ICSI, so that at least some of the eggs would be fertilized in terms when they are not fertilizable by the conventional IVF. And by conventional IVF, shorter insemination is the recommended one. And a newer sample, that is not a sample which was collected 6 hours before, but a newer sample is what is recommended. And there was a description of the high concentration insemination as well, when there is a necessity, that also can be done in smaller drops. So we have got lots of, pointers from this excellent discussion of an hour and a half we've had today. I've learned a lot. I'm sure our participants would also have had at least to take home at least 10 points from this panel today. Thank you very much to the panelists. I think it was an esteemed set of people we had here, and with a lot of experience put together. It's a lot of years of experience, all of you, and thank you so much for sharing all your experiences through the years. Like as I said, we started with ICSI. You all started with IVF. So the wealth of information that you shared today, thanks to that, thank you very much. And I thank Sarapreet for being such a nice co-moderator, and he's put in lots of efforts to prepare all those.
It was an absolute pleasure to be on the panel with Sarab and Priya,
thank you
and
so
all
much.
my fellow panelists. It was really wonderful. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, everyone. And do always teach your embryologists the art of IVF, because your ICSI machine can go wrong, but I think if you have that knack of doing good IVF, as Dr. Sapna has and Dr. Vijay has.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here. Vedji and Charudat ji, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Ved, for having us here. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
listening to all of them today.
So at the end, I would like to thank all of my moderator, Dr. Priya, Dr. Sarapreet, and panelists, Dr. Vijay, Dr. Sapna, Dr. Devan, and of course, Dr. Alex. So thank you again, and thank you to Jaidus Cadilla for supporting for this event. I want to ask Fana if anyone is there from your company want to thank or something.
So I'll be representing Tidus. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to conduct such an informative session. So this was the 5th edition that we had conducted successfully. So we had around 178 participants from Zoom and another 100 participants on the Facebook Live as well. So definitely a good turnout and a very interactive session. So thank you so much for this opportunity, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All. Thank you so much. See you in the embART.
Yes.
See you all in the embART.
Thank you, Vedji. Bye. Bye,
Very soon
everybody.
we are
Good
getting
night.
invitation.
Good night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
sir. Vijay sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sapna. Thank you,
Thanks.
Alex. And thank you, Devan,
Thank you.
for the great
Thank
discussion.
you.
Alex, bye.
Okay, bye bye.
Dr. Vijay, bye-bye. Dr. Sarah, bye.
Take care. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
Nice meeting Dr.
Bye-bye.
Sapna. We never
Thank
met.
you.
Actually.
Yes, we never met Dr. Sarab, yes. We shall
He
meet
didn't
now
come to
more often.
AIS in Hyderabad.
Yeah,
Oh my
why did you
God.
not come? I'm the organizing
Oh my
secretary of
God.
ACE. You did not meet me.
Oh my God.
I was actually